That is great.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. This is our February Montana State Library Commission. And I just want to thank and extend gratitude to the staff and the hospitality that we received at the Capitol last night. Huge kudos to everyone who showed up and who was there in spirit. It was a wonderful event and heard so many positive remarks about Montana State Library. With that said,
We deserve a good turnout of legislators.
yes,
Great.
good turnout. We have an agenda that I promised that I would stick to the timeline for. I'd like to call the order and do introductions. I'll start. I'm Dalton Johnson from Missoula, Montana, and I'm the chair of Montana State Library Commission.
Peggy Taylor, Whitefish, Montana, and I am vice chair.
Tammy Hall from Bozeman, Montana, and I am a commissioner.
Tom Burnett from Bozeman.
Patricia Dubosky, I'm from Montana State University in Maryland.
Robin Scribner, I'm from Geraldine, Montana, and I serve as commissioner.
I'm Jenny Staffen, State Librarian.
All right, guys. Next on our agenda. I would just like to recognize a few staff, and I know Jenny, do you have any words you'd like to share for?
I do want to acknowledge Rebecca Camp. She is our data coordinator here at the State Library. She is celebrating her 5th anniversary with the state of Montana, but we've known her far longer than that. She is one of our library staff that we stole away from another Montana library. So I first met Rebecca, I was trying to remember, maybe 2013, 2014, and Rebecca was the youth services librarian at the Belgrade Community Library, and I got to know her when she was working to implement an early literacy program there. And she held a number of positions at the Belgrade Library, including providing technology support. And with that knowledge and experience, we hired her away to be one of our system administrators for the Montana Shared Catalog. And she worked in that role for about 4 years. And then we had the opportunity to offer her the position of our state data coordinator. And as you know, she's the person behind all of the amazing dashboards and data collection tools. She really has a thoughtful mind for doing data analysis, both quantitative and qualitative, and really helps us to articulate the impact of our work and to collect information that helps us to analyze and plan for our services more effectively. And I'm so grateful for her and the amazing leadership that she's showing in this position. Also, all of the wonderful handouts that you've seen for our legislative priorities were developed by Rebecca. So she has a great eye for graphic design. Just really a leader in that role. So Rebecca, thank you. Congratulations on 5 years. We're so grateful to have you on staff.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to work with the State Library.
And next, I would just like to recognize Jenny. Today, she is being honored for 20 years of service at the Montana State Library, well, with the service to the public. And I think the importance of the work that we all do is often underappreciated and not recognized as often as it should be as public servants. 20 years is something to be proud of and quite an accomplishment. The commission did a little token and got you a bouquet of flowers.
Well, thank you all.
But, well, thank you so much for the work you do.
Been here, so first give you that, on the staff side, when Melissa asked if I do this, I was very excited. Those of you who don't know, I've worked for Jenny for 14 years here at the State Library. But also, even though I've done a lot of these for a lot of staff, for some reason this felt a lot more pressure. I don't know. So I called in some reinforcements. We'll try to keep it quick and keep it on the agenda. But I do want to say a couple of things. One is, I'm tempted to say we've kind of been through and seen it all here during this time, but if we'd done this in 2019, 10 years into this, I would have said the same thing. At that time, we'd already seen a lot of wins and losses. We'd seen legislative wins from early in Jenny's tenure as the state librarian with state aid and the water information system. We've certainly seen losses with 2017 cuts to our budget. We've been through restructuring, welcoming the basement service center here, and ultimately leading to a reorganization to the flatter org structure that we have in place today. We've seen really generational change in our staff. I've lost count of how many 20+ year employees retired in that decade, and that was just up until 2019. We've seen a total refresh of the systems that we have in place here. The core, the computing environment has changed 2 or 3 times during that tenure. And then all of our tools and applications, and these were tools and applications that have been in place for 10+ years. And so we didn't just rewrite them, but we rewrote them for an environment that is new and different, where we knew we'd never again have systems that lasted for 10 years, because that's just, the change environment we worked through. And then things changed. and then there was COVID. And then there was a flood in our building on the second floor. And then we moved to a new building. None of these things, I would have never imagined in 2019 that we would ever be in a different building than we were at that time. And we had, for me, for at least in my realm of thinking, the most successful legislative session that I've been a part of since we've been at the library. So I just want to mention a couple of very quick things before I hand it off to Tracy and then Darlene. There really, I feel like 2 things that I kind of have taken for granted over that time when I stopped and thought about 14 years here. And one is, not a lot of people work in the same job for 14 years anymore, and very few get to work for the same person. And so I feel very fortunate there, and that's a combination of opportunity and good fit and all of that. And so I'm very grateful there. And the other is, I've really taken for granted that I had the opportunity to grow into my role. Jenny's given me that chance through a variety of different positions. Jenny hasn't worked for the state much longer than me, or the state library much longer than me, but you could really tell that she, this was the job for her, because she stepped into it from day one. Those wins in 2013 were within the first year of her being a state librarian. And so I just think sometimes I don't appreciate as much as I should how well she has guided this agency during this time. So thank you so much.
You're not supposed to make me cry.
That's not fair. Few blocks, so I can't look at her. If we're a legislative committee, I'd be like, ditto. So Jenny, I actually met Jenny through being the chair of the Cates Scholarship Committee, because Jenny was one of our recipients. The Cates Scholarship is given to those who are going for their master's in library science and show leadership potential. She's probably like a really great example of that, I would say. She worked for the Historical Society, and then she came to work for the state library as the Montana Shared Catalog trainer, and then has worked in other roles in the state library, which I think is really shown in her work as the state librarian. She really understands all the different pieces of the state library, but she's worked in all the different departments. And she brings an amazing perspective and a willingness to listen. Like Evan, I have found her to be a great boss. She listens to me. She pushes me out of my own comfort zone, and she has such vision, and it's been a real pleasure to work with her. It's nice to have a boss that cares about you and cares about your well-being. It's been a pleasure to you.
I could ditto everything and I could talk for hours, but I promise not to do that. I thank Evan and Tracy for making sure I knew about this event. And I'm just so pleased, and congratulations, Jenny, on the 20 years. All of you that have been employee or a boss or a supervisor, you have this feeling when you walk in and meet somebody that they're great. I mean, within a half hour, I knew that I believe the shared catalog staff are the ones that hired Jenny. I didn't get to do that that time. I think I hired her later, but anyway. But they are the ones that first got her on board, and of course, shared catalog is one of our prize projects early on. There's been tons of them since. I feel like I can't believe it's been 12, 13 years since I left the state library, but I knew when I walked out the door, you guys were in good shape. Jenny was an excellent employee from day one. She took on opportunities and flew with them, was a great leader, getting her people behind her and around her. And she faced challenges, unbelievable. I can't believe the challenges she's faced since I walked out the door. I thought, phew, no. But I knew she would handle it. I knew she would do good. And I just prayed and loved her in the background, but she's just a wonderful person. I'm glad she's here, and you've had her for 20 years in various roles, and you can hang on to her as long as you can. It'll be wonderful. You got 15 more if you're going to catch me. So just thank you, and I'm very pleased.
It's always positive to hear such remarks from staff and members of the public about the work of our employees. And again, thank you so much. Next on our agenda, prior business, Jennifer Burnell.
Yes, thank you, commissioners. Last time you met, we discussed the teacher workshop that we held over the summer. And at that time, we were going to have Craig Claremont talk about his project and the experience of being part of that. And unfortunately, we ran out of time last time. He is here with us today. You can see him on the video there, and he's ready to talk to us about his project. And then I have a few other updates about the Montana Memory Project when Craig finishes, but I want to make sure we don't lose him to, his short window of prep time right now. So, with no further ado, Craig Claremont. Craig, you're muted, so we can't hear you.
Oh, the typical Zoom mute. All right, sorry about that. Yeah, thanks for the invitation. Yeah, I just wanted to talk about my experience and let me know if you have any questions or anything. But overall, it was a great experience. It was one of the best highlights of my, I guess, career for personal in-service. Getting something out of it and going to a place where you could experience basically what you're studying. It was a lot of fun. I think the time period that was allotted to get our work that we were supposed to be doing, the experience and the research was perfect. Getting there, learning about the Montana Memory Project, what was all the resources that are there, and then seeing what Jennifer and everybody else is trying to do with those resources to try and put them together into projects, so people can take all these multiple primary sources and put it into something that's comprehensible. And so when I got there, I initially wanted to do some research more on some tribal research, but looking into the Montana Memory Project, the primary sources there wasn't what I was looking for, but through serendipity, I was able to find quite a few resources on the bison. And I'm a teacher here at Corvallis Middle School, and I teach Montana Indian Studies to 7th graders. And I found quite a few resources on the bison, and especially the decimation of the bison, and that fit perfectly into a part of the unit, the bison unit that I have, that there was a gap there. And so I was able to put together what I thought would be a good informational presentation that I could use with the kids with the bison unit. So we talk about the uses of the bison, how it impacted all the tribes, how it was so vital to their survival, and then the colonization of Montana came along and the decimation of the bison. And I didn't have a lot of resources on that, but I did have the gap forward or the jump forward to present day, where they're reclaiming, trying to reintroduce the bison to the different tribal reservations and preservation programs and promotion programs. So the gap that I had was the decimation of the bison. So this worked out really well. The research time for it was great. I had just the right amount of time to put something together, and it was essentially finished by the time we were finished with our session at Shoto. And I'd never really spent any time around Shoto since I was just a little kid going through Glacier and passing through there. So as an adult, it was great to go through there and experience the area, do some fishing and things as well. And then we stayed a little bit later, my son and I, and experienced north central Montana and did some more fishing. So yeah, it was great. And yeah, so Jennifer put together a really good program. I'm really trying to promote this to other teachers as well, whenever I get a chance to. And some of the social studies and the history teachers, and even English teachers are somewhat surprised by like just the amount of information that the Montana Memory Project has. And so I think I piqued their interest. Might be a little daunting for them to maybe put something together for themselves. So a project, the professional in-service that Jennifer had put together, I think would be a great opportunity for them to be able to use that time to do that. So yeah, anything else that I could cover or that you'd like to know?
Only if the commissioners have questions. Thank you, Craig.
Sure.
Do you have any questions?
I did. Craig, this is Robin Scribner. When I was reading through your, through all the, and looking at all the pictures, I just had one question. How many bison do you think initially were there, were here? Was that in any of your research? Were you able to find that number?
There's some initial, just in the Montana area, there wasn't much, but there was the estimation of around 60 million bison for the Great Plains, but nothing specifically for the northern herd, other than the fact that there's some big numbers of like 10 to 20 million out there. So that's all I could really find.
Yeah, that it was very interesting. I really enjoyed the presentation or the what do you call it? The exhibit. Yes. I really enjoyed
Good
it.
exhibit.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I had some personal research with that too as well. My family, being Little Shell, Chippewa, they would set up, and I put it in there that they would be cutting wood for the steamboats coming up and on down. And then there were some photographs that I was able to kind of put together with that too. So that was really intriguing, and to see that my family members were mentioned in there as well. That was great. So
Now, was that by Fort Benton?
yes. Yeah, Fort Benton all the way stretching over to basically where the Fort Peck, Hell Creek area is.
Commissioner Burnett?
Question for Rebecca. What's the traffic on these teacher created exhibits?
Well, I think Jennifer was going to pull up her dashboard in a moment, but they're just skyrocketing right now. Actually, last month they had their highest page views ever. So, do you want to pull that up?
With any more questions?
Yeah, hold on. So you can see their exhibits on the right there. And I think Jennifer might talk about the boarding schools a little bit too, but that's their top exhibit right now. But you can see that they're increasing in use this year, and the site overall is just growing all the time.
Those are just the top 10. We now have 38 exhibits online. And some of those have just been newly launched within the last month or two, and some were launched this fall. So the oldest one is the boarding school exhibit, which has the most views up there. And I will talk about that more in a minute. But then one of the newest ones is the Virginia City Tour, which is also very high, but we've been really promoting that in our Facebook promotions, which I'll talk about a little bit more as well.
Thank you.
Superintendent Arnson.
Thank you, Craig. I very much appreciate your lifelong learning. And also you put some of yourself into this. And that's who we are as teachers. So great shout out. A+.
All right, thank you.
Craig, I was wondering too, where did you go fishing in north central Montana?
We did Pishkin. We tried Pishkin. That was a lot of fun for some pike. And then we went to Francis and got blown out with the wind.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure you did.
And then we spent the rest of the time at Tiber, and that was great. We caught a lot of fish there. It was great. So yeah, a lot of fun. We'll be coming back.
Estimation of the fish.
Craig, you mentioned that the time allotment was just right for this class? And you feel like it's a very good use of time for teachers,
Oh,
the workshop?
yes, definitely. I really appreciated the kind of the full day session, coming in, breakfast, and Jennifer made sure the meals were arranged so we didn't have to stress or go places and waste time to do that. So we pretty much got right to work, and then Dave was there too to help with any technical and show along with that. And then Jennifer coordinated, and it just kind of prompted everybody along, showed the resources, how to use them, and then just let people get to work. And then when people were kind of, not people, but just the people who were there, had questions about, should I try this or this? Jennifer and Dave were awesome. And then some teachers eventually started finding more, and they started sharing with other teachers, educators there, and it just kind of grew. And yeah, it took me, I want to say probably a good 2-3 hours initially, but once I found the resources that I was looking for, once I narrowed my topic down, boy, it just kind of opened up, and it was great. And then just each day, kind of, here's your daily goals of what to kind of do, and if you needed help with that, they were right there to do with that. And teachers were helping each other as well. So yeah, it was great. I really thought that was just perfect for the amount of time.
Craig, when this was presented to us, it seemed like some of the teachers arrived with lesser expectation of what their products would have to be. And some of them, like you, had a pretty high expectation. Do you think there's something we can do so that when people arrive, they have a better understanding that they're going to put a product out that's going to be worthy of being on the memory project? Do you think that's getting clearer now?
I think so. I think that I would definitely agree with that. Some teachers kind of maybe came in with like, well, maybe I'll just do this for the credit and check it out and whatnot. But as we're going through, myself plus some of the other teachers who really wanted to put something out that they could use, I think kind of prompted the others to put some more work into it too. And then some educators there were just seeing how big this is, and so they were, I guess, kind of promising themselves that they would follow through with it later and maybe finish it later. But they seem to be a little overwhelmed in some ways too. But I think overall, just holding that carrot of the dangling the carrot out there of if you finish your exhibit, then there would be a stipend at the end. I think that really helped as well. But yeah, it definitely became more clear as we were going through that.
I would encourage the people in charge of this to have you maybe record a message or that could go on it as it goes out this year, and encourage people, this is what you can accomplish. This is how wonderful it is. And again, you get out of it what you put in, but please come prepared to have something for the memory project to Richmond, Montana. I think you'd be a great spokesman to clarify that.
Oh, thanks. I'd be happy to do that if you wanted.
I was wondering also, where did you hear about this, Craig? And was it an email? Where did you actually hear about the class?
Yeah, there are 3 sources. One of our other teachers, Jennifer Powell, she's the Montana history teacher here at Corvallis Middle School. She had heard about it, and I think she did something with it at one time in the past, but it wasn't the same situation, but it was some kind of presentation that she'd gone to and really liked it and saw some of the resources. But it was before definitely the modernization of the resources and online and whatnot. And then our librarian, he's great about professional in-service, and he got an email, and he just happened to stop by my room and said, I'm going to send you and plus all the social studies teachers an email from the Montana Memory Project. Looks like a great deal. There's a session in Shoto, and we talked a little bit about exhibits and whatnot. So he's great, Vic Mortimer. And so that piqued my interest. So myself and another teacher, the science teacher, we were going to try and collaborate and do that together. And I ended up getting selected, and the science teacher was a little bit bummed, but he's bound and determined. He's bound and determined to reapply if it should have come up. So that's how I heard about it. And then now I'm on the list and whatnot, so I see the emails and things.
So there was a selection process then. How
There
many people
was.
initially applied?
Initially I had 33 people apply for 20 slots. And then sadly 16 showed up. So
Oh.
Craig's partner could have
Could've
ended up
come.
coming because 4 people didn't, and that I
Right.
was kind of disappointed in that.
Right.
But I guess that happens. So
Commissioner Burnett.
How much have we paid in stipends?
the total conference was right around 15,000, and I paid $375 in stipend times 13 that submitted their actual projects. So I don't have the exact number for you, but you can do the math.
I can-
I can get that in a report if you prefer.
Craig, I would encourage you when you do your little preview for how exciting this is to explain that there are people who don't get in, and if you don't show up, that's a real loss to the program. Please don't do that to us, because that would help coming from you.
Okay,
Yeah.
Any further discussion? Thank you, Craig, so much.
Thank you, Craig.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Craig.
very
I
nice.
appreciate it. Thanks again. All right, take care.
Bye. So while the dashboard is up, I will talk about this a little bit. Jenny and I have had several conversations about all of a sudden the boost that we are getting, and you can see our total history portal pages have skyrocketed to 100,000 views for the month of January alone, which is our best on record. In Content DM, it looked a little inflated in our old platform because we had 2 URLs. You were diving from our front facing pages to another URL for our Content DM pages. So we have old stats that look higher, but we know this is the best we've ever done in a month's time for having people visit our site. One of the things that's driving that traffic is the boarding school exhibit. And one of the reasons it's so high is the 1923 Yellowstone series is showing the experience of a young woman attending a boarding school. And then people are searching for information about boarding schools, and we come up near the top of the list when you do a Google search for that. So that exhibit is educating people, which is great, about that experience for students in Montana and what there were actual native boarding schools in this state and what they look like, and kind of what a schedule of a student at those schools looked like. So we're really thrilled with that. We're thrilled that 1923 has drawn some attention to something that we are providing and filling in the niche for education. And that's just made a huge impact on the number of page views. Of those 12,000 page views since the beginning of the fiscal year in July, 9,000 were last month. And that series launched December 18th. And we've seen a huge uptick just since December 18th in the use of that particular exhibit. So it skyrocketed past all the others. It was hanging out down at the bottom of the list until December, and then all of a sudden it just skyrocketed to the top. So you could see it's number 6 in our top collections as well with the number of views. So we're just really pleased with that. The other number I'd like to point out on this page is our Facebook reach. A lot of that has come from Facebook because we have been promoting things there. Like I said, that Virginia City tour, we promoted heavily last month because it's our newest exhibit on Facebook, and we've reached nearly 5.5 million people through Facebook since July of this last year. So, so a couple announcements. You'll see our new name at the top there. We are changing from Montana Memory Project to the Montana History Portal, which I think so much better expresses who and what we are. We are a portal to this content that has been provided by museums and libraries across the state. And not only that, they have a link to those museums. And I've heard from several museums that have contributed content that people visiting their museum in the summer say, we saw some of your content on the internet and we wanted to see what else you have. And they would cite that they'd seen it on the Montana Memory Project. So we're very excited about being renamed as the History Portal. And with that will come a new look. March 2nd, we will have a brand new look. And right now we are advertising our newest project, our project this month, which is the picture prompt writing contest. So you can take any image from the Montana Memory Project and write a short story and submit that to us. And we have prizes. We partner with the magazine Distinctly Montana. They publish the winners on their web page. They also give gift cards to their store and a subscription to their magazine to the winners in each age category. And we have a 3rd through 6th grade, 7th through 12th grade, and adult categories for that. And we've always had really good responses. We're average about 60 entries in the early elementary, a few less in the upper elementary or upper grade school. And then in the adult category, we average about 20. We try to get it at least that many. And so this is our 3rd year of doing it, and we're very excited. We've started promoting it through our social media sources as well. So
Can you say what the name of that is?
yeah, it's the historical picture prompt writing contest.
Can you Google or can you?
Yeah, if you go to our website, actually, we have a contest tab at the top of the page, and you can click right on that and get all the information for the contest right there.
Commissioner Hall.
I just wanted to thank you very much. I am the one. Somebody had asked asked Jenny, why were we considering renaming it? And first time I met you, I asked, could
Yeah.
you please consider it? Because when I saw Montana
Believe
Memory
me,
Project,
Tammy,
I thought it was dementia
yeah, I
or
know.
Alzheimer's. And is what it was about. And when she explained it to me, I was so much more excited. I just want to thank you. History Portal to me is just perfect. I just think it's a perfect name.
Thank you.
I'm just very excited about
For
it.
years, I've wanted to change the name. I felt like it didn't say what we did. Memory Project was something I had to explain every time. And now when I say Montana History Portal, it's a little more clear what we do. A
Absolutely.
little more
Thank
clear.
you.
And I'm in very much agreement with you. Memory Project, I got asked many times, are you helping me with dementia? Are you gonna help me with my memory? Over and over and over again. So I was tired of trying to give an elevator speech in succinct, quick language about what we really were.
Yeah, I appreciate it because I thought maybe it was because I'm 73 and struggling. That it was going to tell me to use sticky notes. But, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Sounds like a doorway into the district.
It's
Yes,
Wonderful.
which is exactly what we want to be. Plus, we're that portal to those museums who are giving and libraries who are giving us that content to share. So we're very excited. The name, I think, is much more fitting for who and what we do.
Right.
So I'm very excited to have our page updated. As you can see, Genevieve flashed it up there for just a minute. We have an announcement that our name is changing. We've changed it on all of our social media platforms now. So we're like slowly rolling it out, and then we'll have a new design and new look on March 2nd.
Thank you so much, John.
Thank you.
Great job.
Thank you.
Next on our agenda is the State Library Awareness Campaign update. That looks like we have Addie. Is Addie with online?
I'm with you guys virtually here. And I did. Oh, are you gonna? I was gonna share live off my screen if that's okay.
I'll let you. Yeah, I will. That's easier for you to drive.
Yeah.
Let me make you a co-host, Addie, one sec.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, you should be good to go.
All right. Let me just.
That was like you were coming in. I mean,
Just trying to find the application here. Well, I got a few things open. You know how it goes. All right. Well, hey, good to see everyone again. Just a short and sweet update here on this this project. You know, we're really excited to be in the middle of the second phase of this rebranding project, which was really the heart of it, you know, which is now that we have this this new brand, which is, you know, more than a logo. It is a collection of messages and brand pillars that really express and better communicate the role and value of the library to Montanans, so that the state library gets, you know, credit for the great work that they do. Now we get to get out there with that message, those messages. And so, you know, we've heard, just observing some of the legislative meetings, you know, we've got some really articulate ambassadors among the legislature, and we've got, you know, we still have folks who could use some talking points. So we sat down with the state library team and identified in December what are our priority audiences and goals for the rollout of this educational campaign. And I'll kind of talk you through this and then provide an update on each of these. So obviously it starts with the organization, it starts with the staff and making sure that they understand the meaning behind the brand. They are able to articulate, the core messages to others, and that they have the tools that they need to, build their presentations, update websites and digital channels, and, be out in the communities with the messages. The legislature, obviously in session, and, wanting to make them more aware of the state library's value, connect the state library with its applications. And so really just putting together some cohesive, concise, memorable communications for this audience. And then, looking ahead, the real-time network, the state library has a goal to grow that user base to 500 organizations in order for it to be self-sustaining. And so we talked about the priority audiences for that, building awareness among them, of course, of the value of a real-time network, as well as putting together a plan to overcome some of those potential obstacles to adoption. And I'll talk more about that. And then lastly, a focus on the Talking Book Library and expanding that user base, which will rely heavily on partnerships to conduct outreach in that visually impaired community, and again, understand obstacles to adoption. So just quick updates on these from an internal perspective. We conducted a brand orientation via Zoom with the state library staff, as well as commission members who might have attended, to show the tools and templates available, how to use the brand, provided recommendations on reskinning web and social properties. And you can see here a screen grab from a page that's currently on the site, talking a little bit about the logo, its significance, and then sharing those brand tenets. And then I just want to note too that we continue to be in dialogue with certain members of the staff around making sure that these materials are accessible to visually impaired users, that the team has the files and logos and direction that they need to be successful putting the brand out in the world. From a legislator perspective, I think we really view this as ongoing, but certainly the state library has been utilizing, those ambassadors and case studies or use cases during the legislative hearings, and to have those, folks speaking firsthand and articulately about the value of, particular services and programs. Last night, I know the library hosted the library legislative night. I know many of the commission members attended. I'm sorry I wasn't able to stop by, but we certainly use that as an opportunity for further education. And then, we're continuing to be in dialogue with representatives to get feedback on how best to reach the legislature and inform future tactics. And I had the opportunity to sit down with Commissioner Arntzen and get some really useful advice, valuable advice from her. And it's those types of conversations we hope to continue, and again, put some of those ideas into practice. And then I just wanted to share a couple of the materials. These weren't just in service of the night last night. These will be materials that the library staff can continue to use in their outreach, in their exhibitions, their presentations, trade shows, et cetera, that they attend throughout the year. But again, beginning to kind of transform that brand into statements of education. So, our tagline, "A Greater State of Knowledge," we've kind of transformed into this call to action and headline, "A Greater State of Knowledge begins here." helping organizations, communities, and Montanans thrive through excellent library services and resources. And then supporting that with more detailed materials such as the rack card that you see over on the right. Just a couple of photos that my colleague took at the event. And then, one of the things that we wanted to, ensure that could help support the message, right, was a short video. And this, this can be playing at a booth or exhibition. It can be cut down for social media and used in various capacities. This doesn't have sound on it right now, so it is silent, but I wanted to just share it because I think it's a really nice expression of all the things that the library does in a very compact space. These again are kind of shortened versions of the brand pillars that we set for the organization early on. Just a couple more quick updates specific to one of the target audiences I mentioned, the real-time network users. We had a great call with the RTN coordinator at the State Library last week and are using that intelligence to do a deeper dive into potential opportunities, not just from a media perspective, but what types of partner organizations should we be reaching out to, taking advantage of some of that shared media you've heard me speak of, engaging influencers. And believe it or not, there are influencers within the state who are strong advocates for the real-time network, and specifically in the precision agriculture field, to understand how we can partner with them. And then also we'll be providing just some recommendations on, how we improve our landing page, improve our resources for those that audience when they come to the State Library site to learn more. So this will be kind of a general education and awareness plan, as well as a specific layer to help us grow this RTN user base. Will be part of a plan that we'll share with the State Library the week of the 21st. And then future State Talking Book Library. We know that we have a goal to expand our user base here. There's a lot of opportunity there, and we're just still coordinating meetings with stakeholders in this community to help inform that plan development. So we really understand, what are the challenges and obstacles here? What are we really trying to solve? And can then, recommend tactics that are strategic and relevant to those to this particular audience. And so here's just a quick, overview of our timeline here. We'll be using this next month to, develop the plan, develop the, any creative or materials needed to support it, with the goal of being, in market March, April, May. And concluding and reporting or wrapping our project here in June. Any questions?
Commissioner Burnett.
Thank you. Addie, is there a way, since some of this awareness is going to grow over time, that we as a commission can have a follow-up 6 months or a year away to see, because you're not going to get from 55 to 500 by June. So that we could see if maybe that occurred over 6 months or a year.
Yeah, I mean, I know the state library obviously keeps really detailed, metrics and reports on a number of things. I think RTN users is or will be one of those. And then we certainly expect that, the impact of the campaign will have lasting effects. There may be tactics that we put in place that the state library wants to continue to support, right? Outside of Hoffman York, now that they have kind of a template or a blueprint for how to do it. So yeah, we understand it's not like, oh, a finite 3 months is going to accomplish the world here, but I do think it will set some good momentum in place.
Oh, so you addressed very concretely, which I'm glad to see, the 55 to 500 goal and the 2,000 to 20,000 goal. But there are many other bubbles in that audience breakdown. Are there any other places where the awareness or utilization is going to be, can be baselined and tracked?
Specific to those audiences or outside of those audiences?
The named audiences.
I think I can answer that question. So with the remaining now about 5 months that we have under contract with Hoffman York, the priorities that we've identified are the legislature, growing our RTN user base and our Talking Book Library user base. We have surveyed the other program leads to ask that question, what are their priorities for promotion? So if we have any available resources under the terms of the existing contract that are not going to be expended with these 3 priorities, we have the ability to then go to kind of the next on the list and identify what our continued priorities for outreach might be. We know we need to continue this outreach work ongoing. It needs to become an ongoing program of the state library with or without support from Hoffman York. And we do have that information about those priority audiences and as you say, what kinds of benchmarks we can measure to project that impact.
Thank you.
Thank you. Follow up on that. I think a paper document or some sort of a document to track the progress after we conclude with Hoffman and York, and then also working forward to those goals that we had discussed in our last commission meeting. I think this just, dovetails perfectly into that. So that way we can then see within 3 months or 6 months, if we need to not reallocate dollar, but possibly, but reallocate emphasis on it. And I think that then would hit or feel what we're all doing with staff and what our messages could be with more of that on-spot benchmark document. That's what I would be looking for.
Sure. And perhaps maybe not we could put it together a summary document, but I know Rebecca's probably listening from one of our spaces. What I think we could probably do is take the metrics that exist in our other dashboards. Like we have a dashboard that has the number of our Talking Book users, for example. I don't know that we have an RTN dashboard yet, but we will. So basically synthesizing the data that we have in disparate places into a dashboard that's summarizing the public awareness campaign. And then to your point, having that information available for commissioners to help with communicating that information and understanding how you might engage with those various stakeholders.
Exactly. Also, though, we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. So I think having this goal setting of trying to reach these benchmarks, if it doesn't happen, then what's the next step? And I believe that would be the commission with the aid of staff to see where that would be. Try to be as nimble as possible and not say we're going to in 5 years get there. We need to have an incremental approach to make sure that what we are doing is the right, to make sure that staff is directed, to make sure that the commission and the goals are all being met. Okay.
Commissioner Hall.
The legislative night, in the 10 years you've had. Been with the library, you've had 10 legislative to work with. Is this the first time you had a legislative gathering like this?
No, they've been having them for years.
That's what I kind of thought that Tom has been at them, he said. So what do you feel so far with the legislature has been different than the way it was done before Hoffman York?
One of the things I think will be improved through the work of Hoffman York is just that recognition that the programs that we're talking about are programs of the state library, rather than people not understanding that the GIS work is a program of the state library, that the Talking Book work is a program of the state library, because we never had that consistent public awareness about who we were. So I think there's growing awareness that these are in fact programs and services of the Montana State Library.
And that's happened because of the reception? Or because you've been talking about it more during the legislature? Because the legislators I've talked to said they knew these things.
I think that having that consistent public face that represents us as a single agency is helping to grow that awareness.
Okay. And then we talked at the last meeting that it would be helpful if some of this money was aimed at bringing the public in to an awareness of how they could listen to the meetings, take part in the meetings, that they were public, that the agenda was being promoted or beforehand, et cetera, so people were aware, the general public. And has that, I don't see that here as one of the goals, even though we as a board pretty much expressed that we'd like to see that as one of the goals. So we could get public input that's not public. We appreciate the staff input, it's really helpful, but beyond the staff. And is that, Addie, do you see adding that as somewhere in here? Because we did talk about it at the last meeting.
I think it can easily be added. You know, there's a layer of general awareness that we're looking at as part of our plan recognition or plan development. And I think, you know, if a call to action to the broader state library audience, which does involve many members of the general public, is to be involved, that's something that we can add.
I think it's really important right now because we're in the midst of the legislature. But I think we have to remember the Montana legislature is January to April every other year. And the public's access to what you are doing here has to be well educated all the time. That's something we need to focus on all the time. So I'd really like to see that be a goal that I'd hate to see the legislative goal sort of suck up all the attention and money and effort when it is important, of course it is. But it's not as important, I think, as public awareness of what's happening.
Thank you, Commissioner Hall. You raised a great point. I think we have a great opportunity to invite that public engagement at our April meeting in Billings and use that as an opportunity for us to communicate the work we do. Is there any other discussion? Commissioner Burnett.
Real quickly, we could divide the 100 or 150,000 that's going to be spent on this by additional users in the RTM or the Talking Book Library and come up with a benefit per dollar, just a theoretical mathematical possibility in the next few months.
Something we could trace.
Attribute the cost to the benefit.
Any other discussion? Thank you so much, Addie, for taking time to meet with us today.
Thank you all.
Next, Tracy Cook.
Thank you, commissioners. I realized as I was reviewing my memo, I gave you a lot of homework. Yes. Commissioner Hall will probably warn you, don't volunteer to be on any of my tasks.
I know, well, I think she's a wonderful teacher.
So the Federation Task Force has met twice. And I think at their next meeting, they're going to be ready to adopt some recommendations for you. But before that, we needed your input. In particular, some of the key things that we would like to improve or change have to do with the reports that come to you, and then some changes to administrative rules. And before I created a mock-up for the task force to react to, I really wanted to hear from you about what you most value about the process and what you most value about the reports you receive, so that I make sure we keep that part and then maybe get rid of anything that you don't need or you don't find as valuable. And so I'm just gonna jump right in because I know you're trying to keep on schedule. And so I'm gonna begin to just ask you questions about under the questions for the commission, so page 2 and going into page 3. I thought we would start with the plan of service and annual report. And if you have any questions, please do stop me to ask, because I realize a couple of you are very new and might not have worked with federations as much as the others. So as part of the process, the federations meet in the spring. They know how much money they're going to get in even years. In odd years, we actually tell them to anticipate they're going to get what they got last year, because of course the legislature's in session and could make changes that would impact the budget that goes to federations. And so the federations come together, they meet in the spring, and they decide how they're going to spend their money. And then state library staff bring those plans of service, or what they are called, to you at your June meeting for you to review and adopt. And once you've adopted them, then that gives us permission to release that funding to the libraries. And then the libraries are supposed to spend the funds in the ways that are indicated in the plan of service. And they do that, and they have to spend it by June 30th. And then they report on how they spent it in the annual report, and we bring that to you in October. So just so you have a little sense of how that happens. So Genevieve, if you pull up the Broad Valley's plan of service. The first question I have for you, so this is step 1 of the reports that come to you, is this is an example of the document that you see. We have definitely streamlined this over the years. And I am curious about if this works for you, if you need this level of detail, or if you would actually be perfectly fine with just seeing, a statewide snapshot of how much is going to federations and how much of that's being spent on administrative expenses, which would be the running of meetings or retreats. And then oftentimes the federation coordinators are doing this work on their own time. So many federations give them $1,000 stipend because they're doing the work on their own personal time. And then you'll see here, this is a federation that has a 2-day retreat. So that's why their annual meeting is so much more expensive. They literally bring the libraries together. They pay for hotel costs for board members, library directors, and then they have extensive continuing education. And then the next line is how much total is going to be given to the libraries directly in individual grants that have to be used in ways that match legislative intent in the Montana Code. So does this work for you? Do you like this? Okay.
If I could just add, thank you, Mr.
Yeah.
Chair. I'm looking at output. So in other words, this is an input.
Yeah.
What does an administrative meeting or an annual meeting tell the commission what is occurring toward the goals that I believe legislative wise that the dollars are being spent toward? I don't, that's detail, but I don't know if each one of the federations then do supply the commission with an annual goal or a 3-year goal, and then what are the metrics used to do that? Because a meeting of adults doesn't necessarily explain what is happening with patrons in that area of Montana.
Okay.
But that's what I would look, because then that points to, if we're going to be looking at the branding, we're gonna be looking at other things that the library is helping, is wanting to increase, whatever programming it might be, then there needs to be a comprehensive approach to it. Not to give them more work by any means, but to evaluate based on output if the dollars are supplied.
So to make sure I understand, Superintendent Hartson, you want for each program, it would be very helpful for you to know what is the Federation trying to achieve within that program? And then in their annual report, they're reporting on how they did in achieving that goal.
And maybe a forward look as well. I mean, I would assume because it's a cycle, it's not so much of what they, of course, how they did accomplish. And the reports that I have seen have been graciously given and have a lot of information with that. But looking to see if they accomplished what their intended goal was, would also lead into the next year of what their prospective goal would be regarding this information. And then, has dollars ever been withheld from a federation based on lack or based on anything?
Dollars are never withheld from a federation, no.
So then I come back to the purpose of this. Now, I don't want them to be doing more work. And are the dollars granted out via the allotment by statute?
And that's part of the study. That's why we're conducting the study. So there is administrative rules that determine what that allotment is according to the federation.
And the administrative rules are housed where?
Under the state library. And
Under the commission.
under the commission.
Commissioner Hall.
I first want to thank Tracy. She does a phenomenal job. And the work she puts into this is impressive. I've learned so much, but so much of what I've learned is so confusing. And I think it's really important for us to understand that, first of all, the money that we're talking about has gone down significantly is because it comes from the coal trust fund. As coal has gone down, as availability of it has gone down. So this is something that, you know, all of them complain the price is way down from what we had. Well, that is going to stay that way or get worse given what's happening. So I'd like to us to have a grasp on the money of it. These are very diverse. First of all, they're very diverse in size. You would think they'd be even, but they're not even close. There are one city has asked permission to move to another regional group because it made sense for them. It was right next door for meetings, and that was granted. There are a few people who think they should make them smaller. Some people think they should make them bigger. Some people think they should leave them as they are. So there's not a lot of consistency for size. The wealth is very different as far as the wealth of the areas. You know, obviously Bozeman, Missoula, they have a lot more money coming in for various things than some of the areas up around you. The management, that's probably what struck me the most. The management of these federations is totally different. Some of them are managed by an elected school or library board. Some are county commissioners, some are city commissioners. Some of them, they all have to have somebody from the managed governing board at some of these meetings. Some of them have very good people from those boards coming and visiting. A lot of them, they've allowed proxies and haven't seen a person for years. What I heard a lot was sometimes the librarian, there's a lot of work for them. And they put together the meeting. And then the person who has to be there from the city walks in and they hand the librarian hands them a card, say, this is what you say. And they say, welcome here tonight. The librarian will be running the meeting, and they pass it back. So this is, I think, a big job for a lot of librarians. The one thing they really felt was that they needed the time together and learning from each other. But again, putting on workshops is a huge issue. Because if you're in the area where you have to miss a meeting in Bozeman, you're gonna pay $400 a night for a hotel. If you're up in your area, then they can put on a meeting. So they talked about having meetings that people could choose to go to.
Can I interrupt? Randy?
Yeah,
Sure.
so I just wanted you to understand that what I learned is that this is. Tracy does a phenomenal job of managing what I see as a really fractured. System because of the wealth, the size, the governance problems within. And all these people do an amazing job to even manage it.
Sure. Yes. So I spoke with Alyssa, I'm not sure what her last name was, from Lewistown last night. And she said, and she does not want to move. But her federation includes Lewistown, Laurel, and Red Line.
I know, we
I
talked to her.
could not believe, I mean, that, and then you talk to, I mean, we could have more than 7 federations, because then you talk, I went to the Miles City, excuse me, I know I shouldn't get so animated. But the Miles City, they go all the way from Glasgow and Wolf Point to Miles City, 6-hour drive. I mean,
Yeah.
and do they have money to spend the night? No. I mean, personally, I think we should give them more money, and I saw that it went from 400,000 to 500,000 down. Now, at one point, it was $80,000 that we were giving them, and now it's down to 225.
And it's
Then,
not gonna
yeah,
get better
it's
because the
nothing.
coal trust fund is
No,
not
right,
pumping up.
right, it's in, I mean, it's like teachers. For personal experience, teachers getting together at our classes and exchanging ideas, that is what these librarians do. Everyone I've gone to, they sit, they know each other, I don't know how, living so far from each other, but they sit and they talk, well, I do this, and I mean, it's such, they have such an interaction that it's so important, these federations are important, so important.
But I would also share with you, my experience is having 3 Zoom meetings, what run very well by
I'm
Tracy.
sure,
They don't talk on Zoom meetings.
right?
They
No,
are,
yes.
well, they
Well,
do not talk, they don't
Yeah.
share, one person
Oh,
might
really?
share something on the Zoom meeting. About, we really need to
Oh,
get more
yes,
size,
yes.
and then there's dead silence and
Right.
later. I mean,
Okay,
if
but when-
Zoom is not comfortable,
No,
for
but
them,
when I've been to them,
but in person,
when they're in
Yeah.
person and I'm zooming in, I can see their interaction. And then Pam and Tracy doing different workshops.
and the
you know.
biggest comment they shared. Criticism, not criticism at all, just comment. Is that they get, and I don't understand this, even having been to 3 meetings that asked Tracy, so this is my fault. Okay, quite a few of them said it's frustrating that they get this little bit of money. And they turn around and send it back to the library services because they have to pay a fee
Pay
for
for
it.
their- Yeah.
So they said, just keep the money and don't send it to them. Now,
Yep.
would you explain that? Because that was a big issue.
It was, so what Commissioner Hall is talking about is. So the legislative intent is that we have more efficient library services and avoid duplication, and that was the purpose behind federations, and they're about collaboration.
Right.
And over the years, through the Montana Shared Catalog and Montana Library to Go and these statewide projects, one of the ways the libraries use this funding is to pay for those services. So they'll get the federation check. And then they have to send it back to the state library for the shared catalog. It makes perfect sense. The problem is, it's an accounting nightmare.
Yes.
And I like Melissa, and I didn't want Melissa to not like me by saying, so can we just pay their bill? Because the problem is, on their books, it will show they have this expense with the shared catalog, but they won't have the revenue because the revenue will be sitting on the state library's books. And they're not, federations don't receive enough money for the entire amount to pay off the statewide project. Plus, Commissioner Hall noticed this right away, it is extremely different. So Sagebrush, 70% of their money goes to pay for statewide projects, but Pathfinder, which is Robin's area, that they only use about 20 or 30% of their funds for that. The rest of it they use for other purposes like summer reading or to upgrade their technology so they can participate in other ways, or for continuing education, which is one of the purposes of federations as well. And so the group went back and forth on this because they could see the logic. It would be much more efficient for us to just keep the money. But the accounting nightmare just seemed like it would not work because of that fact that they would have that expense on their books and no revenue. And it's inconsistent because Montana is so different. And that is one of the things people talked about with federations. The power of them being regional is a lot of those libraries in that region share characteristics and the flavor of their region.
Okay.
And so federations allow them to experience that and come together and collaborate with one another. And so, you know, a lot of the ideas for statewide projects that we have now were born in federations because they're smaller and people would come together and talk about the challenges facing them. And then we figured out, oh, well, that's not just a challenge in Western Montana, it's also a challenge in South Central Montana, and we could kind of scale up. And that's the beauty of federations. That helps. I fear that I might be taking more than the time I'm supposed to. So I wanted to bring it back to the plan of service if I could. So what I heard is that actually this document works for you. You like seeing the breakdown per federation, and you like knowing how much each individual library is going to receive. You would not, and I think this is an excellent idea, Superintendent Artson, you would enjoy seeing each year a forward look in this document. Like, what do they want to accomplish with these different programs? I'd like now to go look at the annual report. And if you think of anything, you're welcome to contact me after this meeting and let me know.
Tracy,
Yeah,
would it be helpful if, knowing that we are 15 minutes behind, if we had another opportunity to discuss this at a future date, because I feel conversation will continue. And I know that Bryce has another meeting he needs to get to.
I'm good until noon. I have to be over there at noon.
I can do whichever you prefer. So if you want to move me around in the schedule, I am here. Okay.
What would the commission like? Being mindful of the agenda, we are running about 15 minutes behind.
I would like to give this discussion. I would like some discussion on this. I appreciate where you're coming from, Elsie. I'm not sure that these agencies shouldn't just get the money and we leave them alone. Some of them are so small that while we were on the meeting, a librarian said, oh, school's almost out and the kids are coming in, I have to go.
Right, they don't do that.
I mean, they have these, some of them, we tend to think of Helen and Bozeman and big libraries like Missoula. These folks are strapped.
Well, and there's only one, maybe two
Yeah,
librarians.
And some of them are doing the work of the city and county commission. They're supposed to get all this signed off. They have to take it to them, tell them what they're doing. Then it goes up to the next group, goes to the city commission, comes back to the county. They have to get all the paperwork signed off. And they're volunteers. And I'm not sure. Does that sound like I'm just
That would
saying
make
it-
the librarians so happy.
I-
You just give them the money.
And they can tell us at the end of the year, this is what we've done with it.
Uh-huh.
This is who approved off on it. This is how we spent it. This is what we plan to do next year. I want to keep this work very simple. Is that?
Sure, if I could, Mr.
Yeah.
Chair, have we had any audit challenges at all with any of the distribution of these dollars?
Never.
And I know I get audited, I'm sure you get audited every other year as well. So I would like, we don't want to create a problem if the problem isn't there. But there needs to be accountability,
Yes.
especially if there's a decrease in funds or even an opportunity of anything different. And I haven't seen the algorithm of how that goes out to the federations. So to me, it is accountability, but it's not overreach, knowing that one size doesn't fit all. So whether there's a goal of the library, what I'm trying to do is add the federation view to the goals of the commission of the library. And if there's one or two or a half of one that meets the goal of the commission, then we're all oaring together rather than having it being unique, but there still needs to be some whatever accountability.
Yes, the group agreed,
Right.
superintendent.
And my
I'm
feeling,
not saying there isn't at this point,
Right.
no,
but
I
not to
felt
be
there was,
overly
Yeah.
either.
no, I felt there wasn't accountability or clarity even for them. I think though, because of the diversity, what we would really serve, and this could, I could be way off base, Tracy, because I'm new, but I've listened to these meetings and tried to question these folks on what they need. What I'm picking up is that what we're supposed to do as a commission is direct to them with the money, what we want. I think that we need a very clear statement of accountability, that we will give you the money to be governed as your regional governance maintains, and that we will receive a report at the end of the year showing who approved this money, how it was approved and how it was used and what benefit there was and why you think it would be helpful next year. I think that report, and they can't have the money without that. It will not, that report will determine if they get it the next year. I think it has to be very specific and yet vague on how they use it. But very specific on what we want.
And that
Does
is
that make sense?
actually a recommendation I have for you commissioners is that we create an administrative rule that says how these funds can be used, that meets legislative intent with the Montana Code. And then the annual report is asking the librarians to confirm they use the funds in those ways and then just report on how they used them.
Amen.
That is a recommendation.
Are
I
the
have.
monies allowed to roll over to another year? Do
No.
they need to be
No.
expended within that year?
They do.
There is any commingling of other monies that they receive from county or local? I mean, I don't know this world,
Yep.
but I like your vision of having something that is a guidepost,
Yes.
which allows variability.
Yes.
One other thing I would add is that being able to articulate the impact of the funds is going to be helpful. If the recommendation from the study to the commission, and if the commission agrees that we need to seek additional funds to support the federation, we need to be able to talk about the impact that the funds have at that federation level. Again, we're down a road a ways from those kinds of recommendations, but I do think that that's something that would potentially come from the study.
And we do agree we need a federation, or is that where we should start?
Well, I'm the newest person here, and I've heard positive things about the work of federations, but when I first heard of these things, it sounded a little bit like going back 50 years before the digital age, when you can dispense continuing education, you can dispense grant making without an administrative level below. It just seems to me maybe a little outdated. And all the costs are not reflected in some of these reports because you've got state and local employees who are being paid through their, their time is costing taxpayers too. And that's, we don't see the whole cost of supporting and running federations. And so I'm not sure the benefits unless it's legislative intent and has to be fixed there. To maybe update the governance structure of or the work that is being done at the federation level. That might be 50 years ago. And I might be terribly naive.
And I understand the point that they want it being 50. Is outdated, but the collaboration, okay, like Tammy said, on Zoom, and I've been on Zoom meetings also and there isn't the interaction that happens when these federations do meet the collaboration, the sharing, the book kits that Laurel has that they share with everyone. And I've been in meetings, the Pathfinder meetings in Fort Benton. Those librarians share so much, and they share a camaraderie that they need. It's like teachers going to workshops. everyone needs a camaraderie that you don't get, we didn't have a camaraderie until we started meeting in person. We didn't, I mean, we were Zoom for almost a year. There's not that interaction over Zoom or that people get when they come together. That's my.
What
That's my
was the
opinion.
point again? You told us in the history of the legislative intent was,
So the legislative intent is to have efficient library services for Montanans and avoid duplication of effort and to encourage collaboration.
Collaboration. yes.
And Commissioner Burnett, you are at a disadvantage in that you have not been to a federation meeting yet to see what they're talking about. I would agree, and the federations themselves would agree, they are operating under a structure that is old and should go away and be simplified. And that is one of the recommendations they had, is that absolutely, they felt strongly their board members needed to be the voting people because they were working with public money and their board members are either appointed or elected. And so they should be the ones to make the money decisions. But instead of having these executive boards and a trustee be the chair, they recommend getting rid of that layer. They come together as a group, they decide how they're going to spend the money, they spend it in ways that meet legislative intent, they have that camaraderie that allows them to solve their problems locally and regionally and to share ideas that benefit their community members. And we get rid of this layer that no longer is needed because times have changed. And that is a proposal, is to simplify all of that. So it's just, of course, the details.
Right.
Yeah. But one thing I did notice in going around, so we talked to each federation in the fall and got their feedback, people who go to those meetings, and their biggest fear was that the commissioner would get rid of federations. And they were like, please don't. There is so much value in coming together with a librarian and a board member down the road who often sees very similar things to us and can help us with our problems so that we can make sure that our people are getting library services. And that's really powerful. Maybe this is a proposal that might work better, is what I could do is, I think you've given me enough direction. I could mock up something and have you take a look at it. Would that, because sometimes it's easier when you have something to react to. Does that sound like where we're at?
I think we could reconvene as a committee of the whole before April, at our April meeting, have a larger conversation and a lot more time on the agenda for this conversation.
We'll have to figure out how to do that. I got roped into 2 pre-conferences so I won't be able to join you for your April commission meeting, but we'll figure it out. All right, thank you. Appreciate the conversation.
See,
For those who are joining us online, I just want to recognize that we are running 25 minutes late. We are just starting new business.
And Mr. Chair, I have a meeting at the Capitol at 11:30. I know this is new business and it may not be on the agenda, but I have shared with Jenny propensity of legislation to look at our bylaws, our rules on how monies are distributed to our libraries. And in a manner that there is a quota of X amount of population to the advanced degrees that are recommended. There is that opportunity to have, if there wouldn't be a fiscal note, so it had to be done in the next 2 weeks. I've staved that off in that discussion, in full well knowing that we would have to open up our rules quite possibly in June to be able to do that. And I would not possibly be here for your legislative discussion on that. I believe it is within the power of the commission to look at what is given, so there is not a penalty. If local control, as we're discussing with the Federation right now, that if local control is given and there is a market that may not be able to give that higher degree, that we trust that community to be able to do the right thing and not have a penalty of dollars not given to the certain different libraries. That would be a rule change that we would have to do. I believe that could begin this early summer in that process of it. I just wanted to add that since we're beginning new business. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm gonna stay till 20 after. Really gotta pop up. I also want to say, this used to be our conference room.
Oh, that's
So,
right.
yeah, the OPI, so I got new souls in here and new discussion, but what it's all about is education. And it's education to all of Montana, so good to be here.
May I please ask you a question? I just had a question for you before you leave. On the legislative, on the House Bill 234, which is the one that as it's written, pornography cannot be exposed, minors cannot be exposed to pornography. And they had taken out of it schools, libraries, and universities. Then they had put in a new one that left in schools and libraries. It has now come out of judicial committee, and from what I understand, they have made it not apply to libraries and museums, but they've left schools in it.
Yes, ma'am, and it is today on the House floor that it will be heard.
And why did they take libraries out?
I don't know. It was
Okay.
Representative Valenville out of Eastern Montana. I know I came in as a proponent to the bill because there should never be distribution of obscene materials within it. I know they were also waiting for an AG opinion on that definition. There is a federal court case that says that this is not an abridgment to First Amendment.
No.
And, but as leading of all of our public schools, I would not want any of that to be present in any lesson. There is a window for artistic and historical
And medical.
impression as well that is still left in the bill. It's not a new piece of legislation. It's something that libraries, museums, and schools were exempt from. So the representative added the exemption or removed the exemption to allow all of that. The process of it, I have not.
Okay.
I'm just channeling schools
Mhm.
and I can only stand for that. We should never have any of that material in any of our public schools.
And the exceptions were very well done. The exceptions were for medical reasons, for artistic reasons, that a employee who did not know about it, like a librarian could say, I have not read every book in here. I did not know there was pornography in this book. But after they were aware of it, then they would have to make a decision with the library as to what to do. But they did just yesterday or whatever, take libraries and museums and put it back with universities as it doesn't apply to them. I think it
I
should
don't
apply
know
to
that realm.
libraries.
That might be something that Jenny or anyone else could answer to that. I don't know that.
Okay, I was curious. So you did support it.
I did support it.
Yeah, it's
And
pretty,
it was-
and the Supreme Court ruled that their definition was you know it when you see it. That was the Supreme Court's definition.
Well, to share, schools have come to me, parents have come to me on certain materials. Licenses have been suspended, revoked, and have conditions on them because of some things that are occurring in our public school system in Montana in relation to this. So I came to support.
Yeah, some people say it's hard to define, but the Supreme Court said, you know when you see it. So yeah, thank you. Okay.
You're okay, you're okay.
I encourage further legislative conversations to occur when librarian staff is speaking. Bryce.
Thank you. Hello, commissioners. I'm Bryce Maxwell. I'm the program coordinator at the Montana Natural Heritage Program. We manage statewide databases on plants, animals, and biological communities. And then we centralize all that information in one common location so that DNRC, DEQ, BLM, Forest Service, all those other agencies don't have to do it. It's one common source of information. And everyone can rely on that common source of information. We put that up on our websites, our field guide, our map viewer, our species snapshot. They get very heavy use, over 500,000 users every year on the field guide. Over 1,200 natural resource managers have accounts in our map viewer website. And we try to make it self-service as much as possible. So So I'm going to give you an overview of the information that we managed today, and then really focus on how we're trying to improve efficiencies and effectiveness of the information that we provide. We're not just saying, here's this big report, figure it out yourself. We want to help you apply it to the process that you're doing to save them more time and money. So next slide, please. We do that with a staff. You can scroll up a little bit. I think we're cut off.
Yeah.
We do that with a staff of 10 to 12 people. We have a couple of empty positions right now, highlighted in red there. In the upper right, and if you can scroll down just a little bit. Yeah, that's okay. We work with NatureServe. So NatureServe is a coordinating body of heritage programs. There are heritage programs in all 50 states, all the Canadian provinces as well. So it's this big network. And we collaborate and make things more efficient that way. And then we also contract some of our work out to the Spatial Analysis Lab at the University of Montana, the O'Connor Center for the Rocky Mountain West at the University of Montana. And then we have a collaboration going on with Montana Audubon on an avian specialist for helping us with bird data and the expertise we need there. Next slide, please. This is a framework of all of the data that we manage. And we like to think of this as a pyramid because it's based on taxonomy and element information. And we have the numbers out to the side. They're just indicative of the number, in this case, the number of species and habitats we manage information on. We're approaching 16,000 of those. Structured surveys. So that would be someone goes out and does a vegetation plot survey and counts all the different species that occur in a vegetation plot. Or they do a fish electrode fish survey and figure out what fish are in a particular portion of a stream. Anywhere they followed a standard protocol, we track that information. That's those structured surveys. So 460,000 of those. Observations on individual plant and animal species, over 4.5 million of those. Species occurrences, these are species of concern that are becoming or already were imperiled. And we want to put that on natural resource managers' radars so that we can prevent them from becoming further imperiled. No one wins if species get listed under the Endangered Species Act, for instance. Models. So we have surveys across much of Montana, but there are large gaps. And so these predicted habitat suitability models fill in those holes. And we have 1,061 species that we have these models available for. Range polygons are just defining the extent of species range. And then that G and S rank, that assigns a conservation status rank to a species. How are they doing? They're good, they're very well distributed, or are they rare and imperiled? Next slide, please. So just to give you a flavor for the information, that 4.5 million observations on the upper left, the 460,000 surveys on the upper right are species of concern occurrences broadly distributed across the state, the models, the range polygons. Just want to give you a feel spatially for what those are like. Next slide, please. We can also, and we do, combine our predicted habitat suitability models together for individual groups of species. In this case, it's an example of our state listed noxious weeds. And you can think of this as a cumulative risk map for invasion of noxious weeds, the state listed noxious weeds. So you can see Western Montana valleys much greater at risk than Eastern Montana, but Eastern Montana, those major river valleys also at risk, cumulative risk for invasion by these noxious weeds. Next slide, please. We do that for other taxonomic groups as well. And here the hotter colors, or the lighter, I should say, the yellower colors are predicted higher levels of biodiversity, the habitat that supports them for those individual taxonomic groups. And basically this can be used by resource managers and planning departments as a landscape planning tool. Next slide, please. And we also manage information on habitats. So the two main ways we do that are with the statewide land cover layer and the wetland riparian mapping layer. They're both Montana spatial data infrastructure layers. And the land cover layer has around 120 different vegetation or non-natural. Sometimes we'll map like pavement and wind turbines and things like that. But 120 different classes there. And then the wetland riparian mapping On the right there, we have mapping in place now that's done to modern standards for all of the green areas. And we're looking for funds to finish off those blue areas. The darker gray areas are getting some updates right now. So about 87% of the state is mapped to modern national wetland inventory standards. So, and our partners need that as they're going through their environmental review processes. I wanted to say a little bit about our conservation status ranks. In the upper left of this image, you can see a G1 S1 on the far left and a G5 S5 on the other end of that arrow. These stand for global conservation status of a species and subnational or state conservation status of a species. If a species is all the way over there on the left, that G1 S1, they're globally imperiled and they're also imperiled at the state level. They're all the way over on the right, they're everywhere. Think of the robins or the meadowlarks of the world. But a lot of species are some sort of combination thereof. Many of them are G5. They're doing very well at the global scale, but they might be imperiled in portions of the range. So they might be a G5 and an S1, for instance. The image on the upper right shows you the global ranks for US animals. And you can see the red is bad. And the cooler colors are good in terms of how imperiled they are. So this is across the entire United States. The image right below that, state ranks for Montana animals, you can see a lot more blue, telling us what we already know. Montana is a very special place, and that's part of why our program is here, is to keep it that way and not reach that level of imperilment that you see across the whole US. So questions on any of that so far? Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So that's just the basics, and I'd love to take you through our websites and show you how quickly you can access information. And everybody from, somebody considering a timber sale to a subdivision to, fifth graders studying their science homework. And maybe we'll do that sometime, but I really want to dive into a very focal group here. We've been working over the last 3/4 of a year with the Montana Wood Products Association and the Montana Forest Council on this effort. And essentially the background on this is that when timber mills sell their timber on the market, if they can stamp it with Sustainable Forestry Initiative certification, meaning they're not just clearing the forest and not taking anything into account, that they're doing it sustainably, they can sell their timber for a lot higher prices. And so they look to us to guide them in terms of making sure that they're not that they are doing it in a sustainable way and meeting those certifications. So in meeting with them, we decided on 3 main products that we wanted to create for them. One was a spatial tool for the timber mills across Montana to use to make sure that when they were sourcing their timber, they weren't imperiling these G1 or G2 species. Again, over on that imperiled side, globally, that is. A second was a brochure for the mills and the private landowners on how they could use our information. And a third was just a general brochure on G1, G2 species and habitats and how they could manage them effectively. So, and then doing that in the context of these documents you see at the bottom, which are already in place, best management practices, stream side management zone practices. So this is just a slide of the tool that I'll show you, but I want you to see these numbers on the left side of this slide. And I apologize if they're not bigger, but there are 184 G1, G2 species in Montana. And so you can imagine, and this was the case a year ago, a timber mill might say, I would like all your data for G1, G2 species in Montana. If they were savvy, we would give them a geodatabase and they might use it in their geographic information system. But we might just give them a hard copy report and say, well, here's an 80-page report. And they would have to dig through these 184 species, right? I knew that might be onerous. I did not understand how onerous that was until we dove into this process. So we've got 184 species. That would be very onerous. But if we break them out as to which ones they're most likely to encounter in the forest habitats and which ones they can kind of say, we're just not going to impact those. It's not in our area of work. So we've created these maps and we've divided it out into 4 categories. There's a central red box there circled, and those are the categories. I'll start at the bottom of this. Unlikely to occur. We could identify a list of 44 species that are unlikely to occur in forest habitats, and they're not going to even run into them as they're driving on their haul roads. Okay, so 44 species there. Then we have another 16 species that they're only likely to encounter during access of those forest habitats. Another 25 that are only in streamside management zones. That's what SMZ stands for there. And then finally, only 16 of the 184 are in the forested habitats, and only 4 of those are widespread. So you go from 184 to, here's the 16 species I need to do my streamside management zone, just follow best practices there, and then I'm covered. I need to consider, could I potentially run into some of these species on my haul roads if the haul road isn't say paved or sealed or a common use road. It's, kind of a new road that they're working on. Here are these 16 species. So, and then we'll show you, actually, let's go ahead and step over to the app right now. That G1, yeah, there you go. So this is the ArcGIS on, you can click on that, got it in the bottom left. This is that G1, G2 app, and then what they can do, and this is available to all the timber mills and the landowners at this point, they can go ahead and click on just the forest. So this is all of them together, but go ahead and click on the forest documented. So those are where compared to that, all that other region that you were seeing, these are the G1, G2s that are in forest habitats that are documented to occur there. Next category down, click on that as well. This is an additional with our predicted habitat suitability models. A lot of these G1, G2 species are not very well surveyed. So we've made these models to guide where they still might run into them. And that orange is that area. But that's a big difference compared to that initial map, right? So then they can zoom in on this map, and if they're not, then the next category down, go ahead and click off those, and then turn on the next category down. You just click on the top 2 one more time. There you go. And then click on the SMZ possible. So these are streamside management zones. As long as they're following best practices, they're going to meet their SFI criteria. And then turn those off and go to the next one down, next 2 down. And these are areas that they might impact species that through their access only. Again, in many cases, they're probably not going to have to worry about them. And then the last 2 categories. And then these are ones that are they're just not occurring in forest habitats. They're either way up in the Alpine or they're way out in eastern Montana, that they're not likely going to encounter them at all. There's a click here for introduction, which you already have open, Genevieve, if you flip over to that. So then we provide them, this metadata on how to use the tool and how they could go through that process and when they should request further information from us. Remember that original big document that I said? Now you can request that document for your local area and know that, hey, I'm really only concerned about a couple species here. Open that spreadsheet, Genevieve, right there, here you go. So then this companion spreadsheet is a list of those species. Again, they could be in the far left column here, they could be access species, they could be the forest species. And if you scroll down a little bit more, they could be the streamside management zone species, or they could be the unlikely encountered species. And for each of those species, if you go back up to maybe the forest management and you maybe go for the 3rd one down there, the keeled mountain snail, and click on field guide. So again, this will take them over to the field guide where they'll see species accounts. We have roughly 16,000 of these accounts in here for species. If you scroll down a little bit, just to give them a flavor for that. The distribution in Montana, the habitats that it occurs in. So it's a way of quickly getting to them what do I need to consider as I'm building out this timber sale? What do I need to avoid? What time of year should I potentially, do this harvest, that kind of thing? Go back to the spreadsheet, please. And then click on the next one over, the map viewer. So again, all the resource professionals in Montana have direct access to this, and they have a level of agency level access to precise location data. But private citizens can access this, and this is a way, again, just to quickly get them to, here's the locations of in a generalized format. It doesn't reveal, that someone has this species on their land or anything like that, but it tells them, am I in an area where I should be considering this? And then I don't think it's important. We can go back. The other link in that spreadsheet is go back to the PowerPoint. The other link in that spreadsheet is to our predicted habitat suitability model. So if the timber mill, some of the timber mills are very sophisticated and they have a GIS department, they can download the model and use it there. Let's go to the next slide. So that's this tool, again, that we're trying to make it a lot easier to navigate through all this information. This is an example of the sort of an early draft of the brochure that we're working on. That is kind of this workflow. Here's in the upper left is our tool that we just showed you. When do they need to request an environmental summary report, which you see over there on the right, upper right. And if there's terrestrial G1, G2s in the landscape, then yeah, please request a tool and then move forward. Or if it's in your local area, then you need to go to the field guide and identify what habitats and what time. You scroll down a little bit. What time of year do I, maybe need to consider in terms of mitigating impacts to the species to maintain my SFI certification? I think I have one more slide. This was just be in that brochure as to how easy it is to file the request. It's right on our website. Data, submit request, new request. They can file a request in probably under a couple minutes, and then we usually get back to them within one business day. That's our goal, is to try to get back to everybody within one business day. Next. This was just one example I wanted to show you for the species, a species that is reasonably widespread. Again, 184 down to 4 in terms of that. So questions? And I know I just sprayed the fire hose at you. I apologize. This is classic. I do, yeah, I do.
One thing I can say is I don't see the library brand on any of the presentation, and I know they're part of the family.
What's that? Oh, you didn't see it?
Yeah.
Oh, go back to the title slide.
Title slide, but on each slide.
Oh,
So what I do in our agency, on every page, it's there, just to recognize
Yeah.
that you've got it.
yeah. I did it when it wasn't over the slide. I have this tendency, this is
got
a
it.
personal problem of mine. Loading too much information on slides. As you've discovered, yes. And also, if you go back to the very last slide too, scrolling all the way down.
Well, I have a very basic question that. Why is this even in the library?
That's a really good question.
You know,
And
it
here,
seems to me this should
Yeah.
be in a wildlife. Do we have departments in the wildlife departments in the government that I'm wondering?
well, I can get at
Yeah.
legislative intent, and the legislative intent at the time that the program was created was back when the coal fields were being developed. And there was a lot of debate and back and forth, and the NRC had one pot of information, FWP had another pot of information, there wasn't a DEQ at that time, but they had their own individual pots of information. It wasn't all centralized, right? And so that was part of the legislative intent, was to put it in one place and have it in a neutral, non-regulatory agency. We don't have a dog in the fight, right? We're not, so we can be a trusted source of information for those agencies that are making the management decision.
And this was in the 90s,
Early 80s.
early 80s, and they
Yep.
pulled it all together. So you don't gather the information, you analyze it?
We gather a small amount of information, but most of it is coming from federal and state agencies, universities, citizen science we're making more use of.
Okay,
So,
then do these departments contact you to use this, or do they have their own?
yeah, we set people up with information every day in all of those natural resource management agencies.
Okay.
And again, we have about 1,200 natural resource managers across the state that have agency level access to that map viewer web application.
I see. So you're a central information center, and they come here to get the information. They
Yeah.
make their judgments based on the information provided.
Yeah, and then the other side of it was just the cost savings, right? Like, if
Right.
it's one group doing all of it, DNRC doesn't have to duplicate that. You don't have to have all those positions replicated. FWP doesn't have to duplicate and have
Right.
all those positions replicated. Same with BLM, same with Forest Service.
So
same
they're
with
not
NRCS.
duplicating this, they're coming to you.
No, there are positions that do similar things in those agencies, but, as an example for BLM, they don't. They've just said, you're totally our corporate database. So.
I don't know, look like you had something to.
Yeah, just one other point. You touched on this a little, Bryce, but while Heritage has been working with, for example, the Wood Products Association on this for the last 3/4 of the year, they have a long relationship, probably decades-long relationship with the Wood Products Association that this builds on.
Mm.
And a key here is that, and this is what you touched on a little bit, when we look into projects like this, we're looking, it's not just to help them, it's a win-win, because if we provide just that report that is very onerous for them to dig through and find this information, that tends to generate a lot of calls and a lot of our professional time to work on helping them. And so by putting together tools like this, we reduce the amount of time that we have to spend one-on-one with them. And so, and that across all of our.
So it's avoiding duplication, and people understand that.
Yeah.
Okay, that really helps me, thank you. I get stuck. I remember 2 summers ago when somebody told me there was a big parade in Bozeman between Antifa and BLM, and I said, what does the Bureau of Land Management have to do with Antifa? And somebody said, no, I said, what? So I was learning that all these acronyms and whatever, all are growing and changing and evolving, and
I apologize because I said BLM just then. I should have said Bureau of Land Management.
well,
but
no,
You
we're
got
all,
it.
but this is something everybody knows that you are doing, and it is not a duplication. Thank you.
Something for, sorry. Just one thing that I'd like to. It's what I would like to see just from Bryce or Evan or Jenny. Could you guys create like an elevator pitch for us as commissioners? So when we're out communicating, it's just this.
Yes.
Because I could say 15 different things and probably say it right or wrong and different, but I want to do it right. And I don't want to do the Montana State Library kind of injustice. So
I was thinking that same thing, it's like, I would just have to say, call Brian. So that's a good, very good one.
So I wanted to tell Bryce that, I went into I don't even know where I went into one of your links, and I kind of got rabbit holed in it because it was like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. And it struck me. All this time, everybody's been saying, oh, Montana State Library is going digital, it's digital. Library, and it struck me yesterday morning as I was curling my hair. I thought, oh my gosh. There is so much information that you can get at a minute's notice then I was talking to Jenny and Peggy about it last night, that you can get at a minute's notice from your information from every part of the Montana State Library, that if you had to go and look in a book, where would you find that book? The book would be outdated. And now we can find it, accurate information without Googling it. And then I was talking to Rebecca, she said, well, okay, you can go on and find the sound of the trumpeter swan. And I said, but if you Google trumpeter swan, who knows what you would get? Would you actually get a trumpeter swan, and we can trust this information that you're providing, that we would never see, that we would never really know is accurate, whereas Montanans can access all this. So digital is, I get it. I finally get it.
Commissioner Burnett.
Question about the 1,200. Are some of those account level users private?
No, it's all state agency, federal agency.
Thank you.
I just want to say, with Darlene sitting here, I think she would agree with me that the state librarian and staff who in the early 1980s, when we were pretty much all about books, that had the foresight to understand that this is public information that should be commonly accessible, and that the natural home for that information is a library. I just think there was so much foresight on the part of the legislature and the state library at the time to create what is now just an amazing legacy and incredible information resource that's really unsurpassed around the country.
I assure you, those that were there that day had no concept of where it was gonna go. But we were very, very well aware that time and money was being wasted with the stuff gathered at all the other agencies when it could naturally come to a place where information, knowledge was used to being disseminated to all that needed it. So, but yeah, I think of Larry Thompson, who was kind of the lead staff at the state library on this, and we lost him quite a while ago, but his heart was in this full, and he'd be overwhelmed with how good a job we've done with this.
Just to add one other thing, I feel like super fortunate in my job to walk into a room, and I'm about to go over the Weed Control Association meeting here. And we get to be the white hat in the room. Like, it's not, I think if you're walking in, say as an FWP employee, someone says, well, you have an agenda on how you want to manage that species. And so they might not be willing to share data with you. Here, they're going to trust that we're just going to put the information out there. We don't have a management dog in the fight. And so I think another agency would have a really hard time centralizing data the way we do.
Trustworthy information.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bryce. Is there any other further discussion?
Thank you, Bryce. Yeah.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Genevieve, do we have any public comment or members from online who have feedback so far? It is 11:30. And just like to break for 5 minutes and have a bathroom break or water break. For those online, we will reconvene at 11:35.
Microphones are live.
All right, guys, we're back in session. Thank you so much for those who are following along with us online. I do apologize that you can't follow the clock.
Well, we have a lot in the short.
But it's been good conversation so far. Next on our agenda is State Library Commission draft bylaws and subcommittee review. What I have in front of you today is nothing that is perfect. It is a proposal of ways we can change the way we function, the way we operate, or this doesn't have to even go forward. Today's purpose is for conversation and discussion, and really a call for members of the commission to say, what would we like the work we're doing to look like moving forward? As the bylaws stand, we have the commission, and then we have the finance committee. The finance committee meets just before the regular commission meeting. Other than that, we meet regularly 6 times a year. What I've heard in our conversations over the past few months is that the commission wants to be more involved in the work. They want to be more informed. They want to participate. And that is what I'm trying to accomplish here. What I've heard from the Lieutenant Governor's office is she supports the work we're doing. She encourages us to continue this dialogue and would like us to have a conversation with her to how to write and draft the bylaws effectively and efficiently to accomplish what we want. So when I say this is not perfect, know where I'm getting my feedback from, and I appreciate the work that you all do. So I want to just have a little bit of conversation today about what we expect from ourselves as a commission, and what we'd like to see the work we're doing and involvement moving forward. And if the conversation is right, I would encourage us to meet again at a future date, sometime in March, at the convenience of Lieutenant Governor to continue to discuss how to draft and create bylaws that work within the guidance of the state. For that, I'd like to just open the floor up to discussion.
With the Lieutenant Governor being, this is her specialty. This is one of her legal specialties, and this is one of her appointed jobs. I would really consider it helpful to put this on a future date with her input and see if it's possible to have it here. If, whether it be a working or together. I think I would be curious to hear that. Now, you have met as a committee how many times and who was on it?
So the finance committee, we meet just once
Right.
before the meeting. So we met last Friday.
And I just add, typically
that-
we only
do?
meet prior to a quarter when there's gonna be a financial report. Unless there's something that's finance related to meet, but so typically we only meet 4 times a year unless there's something else to discuss.
Go ahead.
Are you asking who's on the committee?
It's you two?
And Tom.
Okay, so that was a finance committee.
Mhm.
Okay, but you did discuss bylaws?
So I brought this up in discussion because discussing this was proposing that we change the finance committee structure. So I wanted to inform the finance committee that I was going to propose a change.
And so you thought it was a good idea to include the finance committee and this super committee.
So what I'm proposing is we have two standing committees within the commission. One that is a finance and administration committee that works internally and works with the efforts of all internal elements. And then an external committee. It's called the External Services Standing Committee, ESSC, which would focus on our outward facing work.
Would they be different people?
Correct.
So it'd be 6 people of the,
3 and 3.
yeah, of the 7.
Who's gonna be left out?
I think the superintendent would welcome to be elected.
I think you're right. What do you see as an outward thing?
I think the network, the work that Bryce had just discussed, the work we're doing with Federation. All of that is outward facing.
Well, I've shared this before, but my bias is we're 7. We're not a great big board. We're not. And we're just 7, and we meet 4 times a year, sometimes extra Zooms. I just think we all need to have equal information. Information is power. And the people who have the information have the power, and that's the way it's always been. And I know that there are a lot of large groups that meet often. As I look at the legislature, there's no other way to function. There's no way to function in the United States Congress if you don't have committees. But I would rather we all work together. As far as timelines go, I think we're doing well. I think, and this is just agenda, but to put from 9:30 to 9:35 to recognize Rebecca and Jenny after 20 years. It's just, I knew by looking at that wasn't gonna happen. And especially, and I didn't even know we were gonna have these wonderful guests. You know, to give these wonderful presentations. I felt like every minute of that was valuable. I felt like every minute of that was important. So, you know, getting behind 20-25 minutes there was not important to me. You know, I want to try really hard to follow these. But I felt 5 minutes on the, you know, some of these is maybe not. But anyway. So personally, I'm very happy anytime. I've learned so much from all of you and your input. I'd really like us to avoid doing committee work. And I really am uncomfortable having a standing committee that's so strong that it does so much with just 3 people when there's only 7 of us.
So the standing committees wouldn't have rule-making authority,
Yeah, they wouldn't have any rule making authority.
but it would give
That's why they're just the ones that.
the ability for the commission to do work. Like right now, we don't have the way or means to create policy to do the performance evaluation for the state librarian. We get guidance from the lieutenant governor that it's probably in your best interest to find a way to put this into your bylaws. But right now, it's not in our bylaws.
Mhm.
So this proposal is a way for the internal lens to make that change. But that's not in the purview of the finance committee to do.
Yeah,
But how do we meet together as a commission of 7 and make that as a whole?
Mr. Chair, we're using committees right now. You're on the task force committee. It would not serve us for all of us to be on that committee. So, and perhaps, but if there were 2 or 3, then you would have something to present as commissioners back to the full group, which I think we've talked about. Having the commissioners present it back, so. Agency or that group that you're working with, so. We are using committees, we are using commissioners in individual roles, so. we'll
it's
see this
really
year about-
important that committees. I always have a very strong clarity. I always used to make it when I taught all this, I used to make an evaluation thing for the committees before they started, so they all understood. Is this a decision-making committee? Or is this information gathering? If we are a decision-making, are we to bring back one side of the issue, all sides, and allow people to see them? I think all that's really important to have ahead of time. To me, the purpose of committees is gathering information and bringing it in and then giving people all information, all sides, and then that helps in the research. And that's what I would think the finance does, doesn't it? So kind of what they do. The finance gathers all the information, gets all the information, comes in and kind of ready to answer the question. And the same with the evaluation. You get all the information, the data, bring it to us, show us all that, and then we make the decision. I'm very uncomfortable having committees that make recommendations one way. Is that wrong? Go ahead.
Question for you, Chair. Did you envision I appreciate the change of terminology from executive to finance administration, because executive executes, it acts, and under standard rules of order, only this committee can act.
Correct.
So that was smart packaging for you to divert to new words. Did you envision with this structure any executive capacity of these subcommittees?
No. And that is one thing that I'd like to be clear is it is not the intent for subcommittees to make decision-making to push the agenda, to push their subcommittee forward. Anything that a subcommittee does would come forward to the full commission. Not to do work and then make it rule. But to do work and bring it forward, have a discussion, and then vote on it.
Would all these committees be appointed by you?
Well, as of now, I don't think these committees will be created until maybe June. So it'd be the next chair. And then each appointment would last until to the next election of the chair.
How did you come with the internal, external? That's a little confusing.
I was just trying to focus on where our efforts and dialogue has been over the past 6 months. I feel that if we had an external lens and an external committee, the rebranding conversation could have gone different. If we had that group involved in leading the conversations with the commission, I think we could have seen a different outcome. Commissioner Burnett.
Yes, Chair, to amplify or to work from Commissioner Hall's comment about the size of our commission being just 7, and we meet, is it 4 times?
6 times.
6. So 6 times a year, we have the opportunity to meet in person. Perhaps if some of this work devolved on the whole commission, and we met more often by Zoom or digitally, more work could be done inexpensively and conveniently for commission members and staff without dividing them into 2 subcommittees, as you suggest. And invite discussion about them.
And I try to always be really honest with you. When I see 7 of us and 3, I know they're not given power, but they're given power to come back and recommend things to us. There is a certain pressure. And the 4, of course, have the decision and the ability to override the 3, but I learned, I think, from the issue we shall not name, that becomes very difficult. You know, I felt there were people on that committee that, I know one who said they were terribly pressured on that committee and it didn't feel like they could even share their viewpoint. And then we were terribly pressured to take the viewpoint, and it's just all. I'd rather not be putting that on other people. I think if I'll put on me. Take the heat if I want to, whatever. I think we have to respect that majority always rules. I think that makes sense with the finance committee that they review people that are excited about and understand finances, and that you review things and share it with us ahead of time. That makes sense. I think the evaluation, we have a document now that we did get and discuss, but I think if we have a documentation, I think you guys going around gathering that was very helpful. But we still had to meet in private session and agree. Well, what are you thinking, Robin? What are you thinking over there, Patricia?
I think a subcommittee could potentially provide more detail in terms of making decisions for the wider body. That's the value I see in the subcommittee, is being able to provide more detailed information so that we can make that wider decision. Personally, is that the intention?
Correct. Intention is to create a better relationship between the commission and the staff who do the good work of the Montana State Library. Not for us just to show up to our meeting 6 times a year, and that's the only time we engage and learn the work.
But we get the information. I mean, we get a lot of good information. Tracy gave us phenomenal information for that federation thing. I mean, all the individual members gave us reports and what they wanted, what they thought was good, what could be improved. I mean,
What I would propose though is instead of Tracy giving that information, it would be the chair of the external group. So it's the commission members leading the dialogue and relying on Tracy to provide information, but relying on us to become subject matter experts of the library. So we are better informed and better able to provide information to the public.
I can honestly tell you everything that I've heard and learned in the Zoom meetings, and we've had 3 or 3 hours of it. You all should know. You should all have access to all the data we've had. There is no way that Tracy today in her 20-minute or 10-minute, as well as she's doing, can give you, but it was all, we could give you the writing. We could give it to you. It's just that was a very complicated issue with a lot of people from different things, and you just, I don't know, it's really hard. My daughter is the fiscal analyst, used to be for a board of directors, one of the biggest banks in the state of Montana. And when they asked her for reports, she's a statistician of the degrees. And she'd say, okay, but first you have to tell me. You want it to say this is a good idea? You want it to say this is a bad idea? You want me to say it could be good or it could be bad? You need to tell me which 3 of these you want. Because
You're whatever way they want.
yeah, because they could turn the data any way they wanted. So she said, before I waste your time and mine, do you want to pass this? Do you not want to pass this? Or do you want to know both sides? And they finally got to the point where they'd say, yeah, we want, no, we want to pass this. We just need good reason for it. I mean, and so to say you're collecting data sometimes.
But realistically, how many of the 7 could have attended all of the task force meetings? I mean, sometimes you have to.
Yeah,
To divide and gather information and then come back.
That's what I mean.
Because, you know, realistically, not all of us, like even just having the legislative hearing, as we said, not all 7 could attend last night at.
yeah.
At the
I can see
function.
that.
So,
It also triggers public meeting.
yeah, let's use our resources of us,
Mhm.
but work with the staff like we were working on. the task force.
And from what I've heard, this federation task force thing we're doing now has only happened 5 years, so,
It happens periodically. I think it's been a little longer than
yeah,
5 years.
like
ago.
every 8 years.
Yeah.
So-
And all of the meeting materials, the minutes.
It's
and
all
everything,
available.
it is all available online for any of the commissioners. To follow and.
Okay.
Yeah, and just to maybe add a little bit more. I love the fact that this is a working commission. I want to find ways to encourage your deep understanding and knowledge and. Ways that you can synthesize all of the information that's coming to you so that you can make
Not exist.
Well, that's why we decided to do bylaws, because we needed to decide if we wanted that in there. The only one that exists by our bylaws is the finance. I'd like you to look at number 1. And again, I don't see us having trouble functioning as a board. I know we've addressed it in a couple of meetings. We've had problems because there were 2 things that came to us that we weren't warned about, and they were there for action. We aren't doing that anymore. Now we know they would be there for review, they would be there for research, they'd be there for input, and later for action. But 2 items appeared for action that we were totally unprepared for. That's not happening anymore, so I don't think we have to create a solution to a problem that's over. On A, I would tell you very strongly that it says that the advisory capacity to the state library and the state librarian on high-level matters. I would think that if it's a high-level matter, all 7 of us should be involved. All right, on number 2, on education and development, I would feel like if we were gonna get education and development, well, there's only 7 of us. And we all see the same problems and know what we need help on. I don't see why there would be any need for that to be brought to us by a handpicked committee. On C, to meet with the librarian and bring us policy development, adaptation and review. That's what we do. That's what we should do. Our policies are incredibly
Who
important.
would you like to see bring it to you? Because when we have staff bring us item.
It would still be staff. They would still be bringing it to this subcommittee.
But then I've heard. Members of the commission say they feel that staff are pushing their own agenda.
But we have added our own policies that we would like to see, and I think Jenny's done a very good job of it. I think that there have been times, I know with myself, with other board members who are here and are here, where we've said, could we talk about this? And then it becomes an issue and they put it forth and Jenny brings it to us. I think those issues that you're talking about again happened before, and I think one of the biggest mistakes we do is we make a mistake and then we build policy around it. I don't think that has to happen. It was a one-time thing, but we do develop policy here like bylaws. Oh, wait, we don't have a bylaw on that? Oh, let's develop a bylaw on it. What do you think we do? They brought us all these wonderful bylaws. We all read through them. We all had a meeting online. We all talked about what we might add. I think then we can review them. We'll get the input from a professional, which is our state attorney general, and then we'll make some decisions. The long-range strategies of D, recommended long-range strategies, including recommendations to the governor and the legislature. I can't imagine that we wouldn't all want to be involved in that. I have some recommendations that I feel very strongly about that I would like to recommend to the legislature, and we can discuss it and, you know, as a role, we take an opinion or we don't. Annual assessment of the commission's performance, how could that possibly be done by a subcommittee? There are a lot of really good documents. I know, I myself created 2 or 3 that go from very simple over non-threatening to very personal ones that you can do on yourselves. But I would think we'd want to do that ourselves. I wouldn't want a committee of 3 telling me how this commission is performing. I feel like we have to all do that equally.
Again, these wouldn't have the ability to tell, only the ability to form and provide.
Information.
Right.
And other duties that may from time to time be required by a committee. That's in there already. We have the ability anytime we need to set up a committee. So. I've said enough. It's up to me. But I would hope that we would not decide until we did ask the lieutenant governor, if she has expressed to you, or did you contact her?
Yeah, we've been communicating, and where we're at now is if the commission would like, we can convene a meeting with Lieutenant Governor at her convenience to better learn how to do this legal writing. Because that's what we need to do.
Mhm.
I'm not a legal writing expert, but the lieutenant governor is. She oversees 160
Yeah.
boards and commission.
Yeah.
So I think we would be well advised to have that conversation,
Amen.
but if it's the will of the commission, I will request that meeting. But if it's not the will of the commission, we can call this conversation, but and can you continue to operate as we do?
Would it be advisable to try, is the April one in Belleville?
It is.
Is there any hurry on this? Would you like to try to do it as a Zoom meeting beforehand or
I think-
in
I think we
Billings?
can meet, I would like to work with the lieutenant governor's office and figure out what best works with
For them?
them, because there's a lot of things going on up there.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the future may hold for their availability.
Definitely after the session, would you say, Tom?
For most of the kids.
We'll see
And
what
it
She
is.
she says. Um, One of the areas that drew my attention to these amendments that are proposed are, when we met at the finance committee, I recognize that Tom is subject matter expert of finance.
Oh, I appreciate it.
But what I'm limited on the ability to do, or we as a commission have limited ability to do, is ask Tom to chair that committee. Right now, there's no order or structure on how the committees report back to the commission.
Sure. It seems that the commission can always appoint a committee,
Mhm.
so it need not be in bylaws.
Right.
And then the 7 voting members can decide from time to time on the need for a committee. So that's possible. Variation on this thing.
If we don't have an external committee, I would like to codify some way or shape or form that we have a member of the commission and the 3 roles that are being filled by members of the commission. Because there's no reason for the work that you're doing right now in writing, other than to be informed. So I will reach out to Lieutenant Governor and find a time, ask her office to find a time that works best with them, to continue this conversation if that works with the body.
So you have no motion at this time
No
to,
motion.
to make those 3 roles part of bylaws.
No, this is just information. Today's purpose is just conversation on how we can operate better.
I do want to point out, I think you showed really good leadership and creativity.
Thanks.
I can tell you're going to be very good at what you do.
I've worked well, I've worked with Jenny and
Yeah.
Peggy and just in brief conversation with the commissioner at our finance committee meeting, just information wise, and appreciated all the feedback, so. Be more informed moving forward. Commissioner Burnett?
Yeah, this is very important stuff, how things are constituted and how things move. We have a lot of precedent in rules of order and in the way things have been set up in the United States of America. So we can rely on those as a pretty good base, but
I think we can set a better example.
That's
we're
very-
thinking. Very important how we organize ourselves to act.
Absolutely. All right, guys, let's expect an email from myself, librarian or the Lieutenant Governor's office to find a time where we can reconvene and continue this conversation. For those of you who would like to continue this dialogue and propose areas of change or a different direction, just reach out to me, because this is a work in progress. It's nothing is cemented. All right, let me get the agenda back up in front of me. All right, state library draft policy review, Melissa.
We review policies every 3 years, and so the state library, the state library trust document is up for review. It's linked on the agenda if you all want to reference it. We decided not to make any changes. We think that the process works well for us. And so our recommendation is that there are no changes to this policy. Is there any discussion or questions that I can answer about that?
No discussion.
The conference room use policy again, for 3-year review. Obviously, we went from a large conference room at the Missouri building to our current one. And so we're just changing it to not be open to the public. The other one, other agencies could book it, things like that, but as you can tell, it's rather small and amongst the offices, so we'll just keep this for internal use.
How is things working out here?
Staff are really pleased. I think we're very comfortable.
Yeah, no worries.
Any other discussion about the conference reviews?
These are discussion drafts, so if there's no suggested changes, these will be on your consent agenda at your next meeting.
Okay, moving forward, I just want to recognize for those who are here in the audience and those who are online, we are now starting the 2023 legislative session update. It was on the agenda to start at 11:30, so we are running behind.
My clock bit, so it says 11. I did a lot, it sure looks good now.
I have a number of things I want to share with you. I hope receiving my weekly updates has been helpful. As always, if you have any questions about any of that information, please do let me know. Also linked from your agenda is a web page that we prepared. We were asked to prepare these for the legislature, and those are included in the legislative materials that our budget subcommittee receives. So any of the documents, handouts, other kinds of reports that we prepare for the legislature are all contained within this landing page that they use. We had our budget hearing yesterday with the Joint Appropriations Subcommittee on Education. It was a positive committee hearing. I think some of them had a chance to listen to it. And Commissioner Taylor offered written testimony, which I greatly appreciated. The legislative fiscal analyst, Katie Cowling, presented an overview of the budget history and comparison and information about the governor's executive budget that's been proposed. There's not a lot of new proposals included in the state library's budget in House Bill 2. There's statewide present law adjustments, other kinds of inflationary and deflationary costs. One of the big changes is the reduction in rent that we saw at the Missouri building, and a new appropriation for the cost of rent in this building, since this is a private external lease. That change will save the state about $128,000. And then there's 2 new proposals. One is a new proposal for one-time restricted authority to use funds in our existing land information advisory council account to continue to fund the ongoing development of the Montana State Reference Network, or real-time network. And then there's a second new proposal for about $1,700 to help fund the state of Montana training platform. That's that training platform that I've mentioned to you, that it will include things like Robert's Rules of Order training. So we were able to review those new proposals and budget changes yesterday with the budget committee. Also included on the website are our 2025 biennium goals and objectives, which we reviewed with the budget committee as well. And those are the areas of focus for upcoming work with the interim committee. The Joint Appropriations Subcommittee was interested in our metrics and how we intend to evaluate progress on those various goals. So many of those you've seen, they're in our current work plan and carry forward into the coming biennium. Overall, really favorable comments from committee members about the work of the state library. The Montana Library Association is making some additional asks of that committee. Some of the things that were initially talked about by the State Library Commission that are not included in the governor's budget, they are asking for the legislature to consider. And so there was discussion by representatives from the Montana Library Association about some of those resources like the hotspot program, the courier program, and our online resources collections. Next steps with our budget subcommittee, they're having a work session on
Are we
Friday.
on a certain page here?
I'm just speaking.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
good. I'm,
Everything happened so fast, it's
Yeah, I
it's hard
know,
to
I-
document. So next steps for the budget subcommittee, they're gonna have a work session on Friday to more fully discuss some of the proposals that they heard about in yesterday's budget hearing. And then they will start meeting next Wednesday, a week from today, in executive action. They have 2 days of executive action scheduled for them to vote on what of the proposals in the governor's budget they wish to support, as well as any additional proposals coming from the Montana Library Association. So by the end of next week, we'll have an idea of what is included in the state library's budget moving forward through the appropriations process to the House Appropriations and then the Senate Finance and Claims Committee. With regard to our 3 agency bills, House Bill 91 is our bill to reauthorize state aid and to extend that funding to tribal college libraries. That bill has been heard in House State Administration and then House Appropriations. It was amended in House Appropriations to require a 1-to-1 match. So a library that receives that funds has to guarantee local funding at least a 1-to-1 match. Public libraries in Montana already far exceed that requirement. Local governments provide about $32 million of funding, and most libraries in the state average around 95% of their funding coming from their local government. This would impact the tribal college libraries if they go through the process of meeting public library standards and securing those funds. And that the match for those tribal college libraries, we estimate to be around $1,000 to $2,000 per tribal college. Initially, we heard from those tribal college librarians that they thought they could support that. Through some ongoing discussion, it sounds like they're not necessarily concerned that they can't beat the match, but I don't think they appreciated that amendment, to that bill necessarily. But ultimately, that amendment is still on the bill. House Bill 91 was debated with the amendment on the House floor yesterday afternoon, and it did pass second reading on the House floor by a wide margin. I think it was 73 to 27 voted in favor of that bill. So that bill is up for third reading this afternoon. So if you see Melissa back out, it's because I've asked her to monitor that bill progress this afternoon. And then all indications are that it'll move over to the Senate side for the same process to move forward on the Senate side. Senate Bill 60 is our bill to authorize the state real-time network and establish the enterprise fund that would allow us to charge a subscription fee for that service. That bill was heard in the Senate State Administration Committee, passed unanimously out of that committee. It passed second reading on the Senate floor by a vote of 47-1. It was heard by the Senate Finance and Claims Committee, where it also passed unanimously yesterday afternoon. So that bill is headed to second reading on the Senate floor. I'm sorry, third reading on the Senate floor because it was not amended. So third reading on the Senate floor, and then it too will go to the House. And then finally, our third agency bill, House Bill 343, is the bill to amend the Land Information Act and the NRS Advisory Committee. that bill was heard last week in the House Natural Resources Committee. And I shared the link to that hearing. I hope you have a chance to listen to it. Just incredibly positive enthusiasm for the work of the state library. So hope you'll take a listen. That bill should be voted on in that committee this afternoon. So if you see Evan duck out, it's because I've asked him to monitor that bill this afternoon. So it's been an incredibly busy session so far, but a very, very positive session. I asked Dylan Klettmeyer, the governor's education policy advisor, if he had any legislative updates for you. The one update he wanted me to share is the bill that he talked about at your December meeting to look at the administrative attachment of the State Library Historical Society and Arts Council. He said they're leaning towards not introducing that legislation in this session, but would consider those ideas more during the interim. And then one other update from the superintendent's office, I had shared in one of my updates that we were consulted on some legislation that OPI is considering that would look at overall the objective of 4 individual bills would be to align school district elections with the general election process. We were brought in to consult on making sure that school district boundaries were properly mapped, that there were proper legal descriptions of all school district boundaries to inform the elections process for that. It sounds like at this point, the bill that would look specifically at mapping school districts will not be part of the package moving forward. And if you have questions about the remaining goals of that legislation, I would direct you to OPI. And then finally, the issue that the superintendent raised regarding public library standards and legislation pertaining to public library standards. You all know that there were some issues in the Flathead last spring with them hiring a director that didn't meet the standards, and that has impacted their ability to receive the state aid that we've talked about. There has been some discussion with some of those legislators about looking at the public library standards through legislation. As the superintendent said, she was able to communicate with those legislators and express that those standards exist in administrative rule. And so a better forum to review those standards is through the administrative rules process rather than through the legislative process.
Where would that take place?
Well, that would happen under the auspices of the State Library Commission. As Tracy said, we already know we need to look at our administrative rules based on the Federation study. If there are changes to our ability to extend state aid to tribal college libraries, that's something that would need to be put into administrative rule. And so there's already a window of opportunity for us to look at the standards and some other standard language that we think should probably be better clarified as well.
So should that be on our agenda?
It'll be on our agenda starting probably in June, once the session is over, after we know what legislation has finally been passed.
Because presently a librarian of over, is it 8,000 and there's only 20,000 in there.
25, 20, yeah. Libraries that serve more than 25,000 people have to have a library director with a master's degree. There are 8 libraries that meet that threshold. About 20% of Montana librarians already have a master's degree.
But isn't it specifically a master's degree of library science?
Library science or an equivalent degree, and that's one of the things we want to clarify in administrative rule, that language about an equivalent degree.
Yeah,
So that there isn't ambiguity in that language.
I see.
So Tracy has been alerted, and she will likely be tasked with leading that effort to update those administrative rules. So one will require commission support as well.
Any further discussion?
Those are the updates I had to share. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Hearing no further discussion, I would just like to break order and recognize that the agenda had originally stated we would have public comment at 12:20. And I would just like to give the opportunity for anyone in the audience today or members online to provide that public comment.
Chairman Johnson, I would be delighted to. Thank you. My name is Bruce Newell. I'm a former member of this commission. I'm currently serving with helping MLA on some of the legislative stuff, particularly the state aid things, and I'm on the board with the Trust for Montana Libraries. And I wanted to say basically two things. Thank you for your help so far with the session. I feel like we've made good progress with the state aid. It's moving along, I think, better than many of us expected, if not perhaps all that we hoped. But it is coming along, and I have, I'm actually hopeful that some of the things that we all want to see, more resources going into courier service and e-resources and those kinds of things will receive a hearing from the legislator. We certainly had a remarkable hearing yesterday, and so that was great. Second, I would like to congratulate the state librarian and the staff on 20 years. Just tell you on a personal note how much I appreciate what you do and how you do it. And I think I sort of jokingly said yesterday that you're a rock star. No, it's absolutely true. I don't know of, I don't mean comparisons are horrible, but I just don't know of any state librarian that has been as effective and as pleasant doing it as you have been with moving the state along. You are remarkable. Thank you. Thank you. And I'm in this case not speaking just for myself. I'm speaking for in particular the members of the MLA committee that have been striving to get a few more resources for Montana libraries. So thank you for what you do, and I'm looking forward to the next 20 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Chairman.
Is there any what else? Commissioner Hall?
You told us you had hired a new staff member last time.
The trust, right? We have.
You had the trust. And
Yeah.
how are you feeling? Are you
Because
excited?
she's great.
Oh,
She's got all the skills, and you know, we're formulating processes for starting to raise a little money and kind of continue to move things along. We see probably a role in working with the Library Association with some of these things, as well as with you. We're all one big family anyhow, so I'm really optimistic. You know, we keep talking about flights overseas, and we still haven't, you know, taxied to be able to take off of the runway, but we're getting closer, so it's good. Good luck for you guys.
Thank you, Bruce. Good to see you all.
I'll go home and pack. I'm going to visit my grandson tomorrow. So
Fun. Travel carefully.
thank you very much, Chairman.
Genevieve, is anyone online who had public comment for the slated agenda? All right. Back to the agenda, Network Advisory Council report. Jody is not with us today. She has attended to another issue, but we do have members of staff who can give us an update.
Yes. So, commissioners, I will make it fast because I know that you are behind on your agenda. So the Network Advisory Council met on February 1st. And basically, I'd say the biggest part of this is we did receive an increase in our LSTA funding, and they're preparing for a recommendation that will come to you for a budget for next year, particularly looking at library development services. So they started out, we gave a training about creating public value. Some of you may be familiar with that concept with the strategic triangle. And they took that and used it to prioritize a list of 3 projects that we had requested for funding. Because 2 things that the NAC gives us that is so valuable is, first of all, just helping us prioritize our work and where it's going to be most effective for libraries. And second, they tend to be comprised of really great leaders who are willing to give us critical feedback about our services and how they can be improved. And so then the NAC moved from that into looking at the funding priorities that staff created, and those are available online if you wanted to see them. You will see them eventually at your future meetings, but they went through each one and had a chance to ask staff about the priority, why the staff member thought it was important, and how they thought it added value for Montanans and libraries as well. The one thing that staff did need them
to approve was a face-to-face fall workshop. This is a request many libraries around Montana have given us now that we're coming out of COVID. And they did give us that approval. We needed it for being able to reserve hotels and stuff. So that will be September 18th and 19th in Great Falls. And so you'll be seeing more information about that. And then we had a few other updates as well for the state library.
Thank you, Tracy. Discussion amongst the commission, Commissioner Burnett.
Question for Tracy. Who's invited to the workshop? And
The fall workshop, yeah, so anybody can come. We would welcome commissioners. The primary audience we focus on are public library directors and staff and board members. And actually, we really try to consider our small libraries because so many Montana libraries are small. They make up the largest percentage of libraries, and the larger libraries can send staff to out-of-state conferences and things, so our topics tend to be focused on those smaller 4 or 5 people or less. That's our audience.
The one we had in Missoula.
Or was
No,
that
nope.
at the Columbus and Great Falls? Columbus Hospital. Or
We have
there's-
not had a fall workshop, a face-to-face
Oh.
one in several years. The
Oh.
last one was in Billings. We will get anywhere from 80 to 100 attendees, depending on the topics. Yeah,
What was
Yeah.
the one in?
so Missoula was the Montana Library Association, and in Great Falls, we had a Directors Institute
Oh.
of Beverly Lines.
is that sponsored by NAC?
Oh, no, the Network Advisory Council is comprised of librarians and they advise us on what to do. We sponsor the fall workshops, the state library.
State Library.
And
Yes.
it's here in Helena.
Nope, it's in Great Falls.
Okay.
That's the location. We got bids from 3 different places. That was the most reasonable one.
Your fall training, when is that slated?
It's September 18th and 19th for the fall training.
I was wondering if it was all around ours. No,
No.
Can't work them
it'd be
together.
October.
okay,
We can change the calendar.
No, was it decided on to be held?
September 18th and 19th.
Yeah,
And it's a Holiday Inn in Great Falls.
Any further discussion on this matter? Hearing none, thank you so much, Tracy. Librarian staff.
In the interest of time, I'll just open myself for questions. You have our standard work plan dashboard as well as the reports that we're preparing for the governor's office. The one update I wanted to share with you about our monthly governor's reports. And Genevieve, maybe you could just click on that one. And go to page 3. So our longer term goals and metrics on this page, as you can see, they're organized by the pillars within our strategic framework. Fostering partnerships, securing sufficient sustainable funding, and creating a useful information infrastructure. The governor has asked if we could put some kind of metric with each of those pillars of our strategic framework. And so we're currently working with our leads, and Rebecca is helping me to identify as an agency what might be the most meaningful metrics around those specific strategies. It's more easy for us to identify those metrics at a goal or objective level. But how do we synthesize those into meaningful metrics at the agency level? So that's something that we're working on and you'll likely see in future meetings.
Any discussion, members of the commission? Hearing none. We're on our consent agenda, I believe.
And Genevieve is going to pass out the executive minutes.
Okay.
So Patsy's out and then gather when we're done. Just name them to help me, just make sure I got it.
Genevieve is handing out copies of the draft minutes from our executive sessions when we met last. Our consent agenda, we're supposed to accept the minutes from December 7th, January, our December 7th executive session meeting minutes. And the fiscal year 23 second quarter financial report. Just take a moment to review the file in front of you. And then I would like to just ask the commission, we move forward with the 3 items of December 7th, 19th, and fiscal year quarter financial report as an item, and then we can move.
These are in our minute, right?
These are not,
These
because
ones.
these are from the executive session.
Okay.
If we need to break for discussion. I'd like to close the meeting.
I move we accept the consent agenda with the new, including the December 7th.
With the executive session.
Included.
Okay. Do I need to, can I do them all at the same time? All right. Commissioner Hall motioned to consider the consent agenda as a whole. Make it a second.
I second.
Commissioner Burnett seconds. It is moved that we accept the consent agenda as a whole. Is there any more discussion from members of the commission? Any discussion from the commission? Any discussion from members of the public? Any discussion, I'll call for a vote. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed? The abstention. Motion carries.
Yeah, I understand people. Do you have name tags for Patricia and
I
Tessa?
do have mine.
You do.
They're unloaded from last night.
Well, you leave them.
Okay.
For the next time. Or do you want your?
If I can grab Tom's.
Oh. You want it back? I'm sorry.
She got yours.
All right, guys, we're on the commission goals and objectives, annual business calendar.
The annual business calendar was something that you asked for at your work session recently. So this is a draft calendar. We're open to your feedback about how to make this most informative to you. A few notes that I would have for your April meeting, and we can add these to the calendar. What is included on this calendar are those regularly recurring agenda items. So you can anticipate that they're coming. Your April meeting, as we talked about, will be held in conjunction with the Montana Library Association Conference in Billings. And a few things that we know will be on that particular agenda. We're going to focus on reports about our Library Services and Technology Act, as well as our American Rescue Plan Act dollars, since we've completed our state program report for those LSTA funds. And by the end of April, we will have fully expended our ARPA award. So we want to spend some time focusing on the outcomes and impacts of our use of those dollars. We'll have an update from the Continuing Education Task Force. We obviously need to have a more fuller discussion about the Federation study and some of the discussions that are coming out of that particular study as well. So it'll be a more library focused agenda, given the fact that we'll be there at the Library Association Conference, and then we'll have additional updates on the legislative session as well.
How does this differ from the one we went to Missoula?
It will be the same conference.
They just are doing it different time of year. Do they do it twice a year?
They don't, but
Okay.
the reason the meeting was in August this last year is that it
Oh.
was, well, COVID, and it was also a tri-conference with the Mountain Plains Library Association and the Pacific Northwest
Okay.
Library Association. So in April is the typical time of year they hold it, and it'll be just the Library Association. And we do have the following day, our conversations with the commission scheduled. That'll be that discussion that we had with librarians in attendance at the conference.
That was helpful. I'd like to have more than 50 minutes unless they wouldn't.
We can ask, I don't know, that's the slot, the conference time slot.
We had 50 minutes, but I thought it was helpful, very helpful.
We could. Always invite them to conversation, to dinner or some type of event, just to engage. Commissioner Burnett?
A question for Jenny. The increased funds available in the LSTA. Is there a draft proposal for how to utilize those funds?
Not yet. That's what's being developed in conversations with our Network Advisory Council. And their next meeting is the end of March. And so at that point, they'll have some draft recommendations to bring back to the commission that will inform ultimately the agency budget that you see.
What's the LS? The Library State,
Library Services and Technology Act.
okay, and that's the one we're asking for more money for the federal government.
We have received an increase in our award, so that is it's called the Grants to States program, and it's a formula-based grant program that each state receives. There's legislation called the Museum and Library Services Act that determines the formula that awards that money to each state for library development work. And when Congress passed a budget in December, it included an increase to that funding. It's about $189,000 increase for the state of Montana.
That's a big increase.
It is a big increase. It's one of the bigger increases we've seen in that award in some time. Typically, we've received anywhere from 5,000 to 30,000 has been a good year in past years. This is
Now, do we commit to something that we have to fund later, even if we don't get the money?
that is something that we are very cognizant of.
Okay.
So we always caution staff to think about, and the Network Advisory Council to think about the source of funds and the use of those funds. And align it with whether the need is ongoing or one time only.
Yeah,
And that's the exact conversation we're having right now with our budget committee, for example. There are proposals in what the Montana Library Association is asking for that could be successful with one-time only money. And there are proposals that really can't be successful unless there's ongoing money. And I think that's an important part of that conversation.
yeah, because I would say the fact that we don't have the money now on the federal level, they don't even have it. They're just making it, that it will be worse to put it into something where they expect it every time they want it. I mean, they may have it again.
Any other discussion on this item?
Thank you.
Hearing no further discussion, we completed all business on today's agenda. Is there any other business or announcements not on today's agenda?
I haven't enough. I received my report you'll all get it, but from the state tax association or whatever, that we have a taxation on our monies we've received as commissioners. And mine was just the total amount they've paid me since I came on in May. And so I called Genevieve because I guess we get paid $50, is that right? Or is it 25?
Commissioner, there's a per diem for duties performed as a commissioner, $50 a day that commissioners are welcome to get.
It's 50 or 25? 50. Wow, I said I could buy eggs. Whoa. But anyway, I just wanted to let you know, all of you, I checked with my tax people, but if you get, when you get that statement, it includes everything. It includes the hotels, it includes the gas. I hated to give more work to Genevieve, but I asked her how many actual hours did I have, and it was $200 for, which I'm not sure how that is, because that's 4 days and we've, 8 days.
So on your checks, it should break, when you get the
Yeah.
checks in the mail, it should have the breakdown
It just had them out.
on the, not on the
That's
check, but
on
on
the
the,
check. Check, it has the breakdown.
when Carol sends the check, it has the breakdown.
It does?
Yeah.
What
But
is it?
not on the,
So like when you would actually get the check. So after this meeting, we'll
Yeah.
check. There's a breakdown on the stub.
it's got,
On the stub.
Okay, and it says so much per hour.
I
Okay,
think we're gonna have a follow-up conversation with Carol and Genevieve on this and.
yeah, I just wanted all of you to be aware of it, that you don't have to pay taxes on that whole thing, but you'll need to know how many hours you have. That's what you have to pay taxes on. So I have to get mine, because I think I've done more than 4 days.
Thanks, Commissioner Holmes. Any other questions? Genevieve?
Just make sure on the worksheet, you mark whether you want your per diem. Not everybody does, so I go off of what's marked on the worksheet.
Well, now I feel terrible. I didn't know we could even do that. I'm sorry.
Volunteer work is appreciated.
I stepped in, I want my eggs. Can't buy them right now.
Other business announcements? Hearing none, I'll call for public comment one more time, since this is a public meeting. I'll have for public comment. Public comment can be made on any items on or off the agenda. Any public comment? Hearing no public comment, I will consider this meeting adjourned.
Many, we have online.
You did, and you did a great job.